Alright, before we get to our feature presentation, which will be shortly, I just wanted to let you, the kind audience, know that the long-awaited trailer for my movie is finally out. It is on my movie channel, which I made however many months ago, and now I'm officially starting it. So I hope to be putting more there very soon for those of you who like more of my rambling or are genuinely interested in the movie subjects, or both, who knows. Anyway, yeah, I'm very happy with the trailer, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's very fun, very silly. It is, of course, linked in the pinned comment of this video, as is the Indiegogo, which is attached to it, because the purpose of this trailer was to give a little demonstration, prototype, whatever you want to call it, of what the film will be and what the team behind the film is capable of as a little demonstration. So with that in mind, we will now try and raise a budget for the feature-length version of the film. And that is where you can help out, if you would be so kind, at the Indiegogo, which is in the link of the trailer itself. Well, the link is in the description of the trailer itself, pardon me, but it's also in the pinned comment of this video. So, yeah, then there's another video here you can check out in which I speak directly to you, you know. And, of course, on this Indiegogo is also a quote-unquote short summary in which I describe more about the film itself. And if you have any questions about the movie at all, like, oh, I want to donate, but what about, you know, is it about anything more than just, you know, silly chainsaw zombie fun? You know, and the answer to that is a resounding yes, and I would love to tell you about it if you are so curious. So you can leave a comment, or you can find me on Discord, or send me an email if you want, whatever you like, and I will happily answer. And that is basically it. So thank you. I hope you enjoy the trailer. I hope those of you who are able to contribute do so. And if you cannot contribute, which is of course understandable, then just spread the word. You know, you need as many pairs of eyes on this as possible. Okay, so now we will jump into our feature presentation. Thank you. So the Smogon Classic Finals took place yesterday, and they are between two fitting players for a tournament focused on old generations, because Conflict and Malekith have been playing even longer than I have, if you can imagine it. Conflict is one of the most renowned GSC players of all time, and Malekith has been, I think he was mostly known for Generation 4, I think that was really his home, but he's been successful in, you know, pretty much every generation. He was really killing it in Scarlet and Violet around the time of the last World Cup, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly anyway. So yeah, he can pretty much play anything, and he is excellent at it. So, yeah, this is a best of 5. Then they started with Gen 5, and then the remaining generations are 4, 3, 2, and 1. And yeah, first to 3 wins, of course. And it's very hyped because these two players are so great and all that great stuff. So, an interesting note about the players before we really get into the battle itself. What's interesting is that these players are obviously very good at any tier they touch, but it would be a stretch to call them specialists in more than 1, maybe 2 generations. And what I mean by that is, if you need high-level GSC, Conflict is probably the first name that pops near your head, or at least one of them. You know, he was pretty much unchallenged in that regard for several years. He knows the tier inside and out, and he makes his own teams, and he will make them in a unique way that is not really possible for someone who's not intimately familiar with the tier. You know, he's digging through strategies that most other people wouldn't even think about, because he knows how the tier functions in such an intimate way. And Malekith is similar, but in Generation 4. He's been known to run some wacky stuff. Both players actually have been known to run some stuff that's wacky, and, you know, a lot of the time it works, but sometimes they go a little too far. But, I mean, you can hardly fault them for being a little too ambitious at times. I mean, yes, okay, some things are dumber than others, of course. But I think you notice this in any creative field. Like, you know, whenever a really creative artist, for example, you know, they go a little too far and, you know, they shoot past the boundary of, oh, interesting, experimental, creative, but still good, and then it's just like, all right, this is just too much. So both players have the tendency to kind of fall over the edge in that regard sometimes. So, whether they've got, the unusual choice of Seismitoad, or, maybe Malekith's team looks very standard, but who knows what's going on with those sets, so... sometimes you will see them bring out a Pokemon which is like, whoa, that's being used. Like I remember in 2016, Malekith was using an Alakazam lead, and it was really difficult in Generation 4, and it was really difficult to stop for these kinds of Scarf T-Tar balances, which rely on Scarf T-Tar outspeeding pretty much every useful attacker. So... yeah, with that powerful Focus Blast cleaving through like Spidef Heatran and Skarmory way better than Gengar could. And obviously can't be revenge killed by Starmie either because it's faster. So, yeah, it was stuff like that. Sometimes you will see an unusual Pokemon right off the bat, where it's like, oh, wow, they're bringing that unusual thing. Or you think they're bringing something standard because it's just, your standard Tyranitar or whatever, and then they pop a completely unexpected moveset on you. So that's what really makes this matchup dynamic for me, that both these players have the capacity for such creativity. But the other thing I want to mention about them not being specialists in more than one or two of the tiers means that a lot of the time you will see this in tournaments that involve multiple generations, where you'll have the player who will build all their own stuff in their main generation, of course. But then for the other generations, they will get teams from other players, from their friends or whoever, or from, they see another player's replay and will be like, oh, well, I like that team, I'll use that. And they recreate it for themselves. So I think that tends to happen in these tournaments, and so I think it's more likely that you see the creativity come out in the generations they specialize in, and then the creativity, and less so in the generations that they play less. So, I think this matchup in which Malekith has the more standard team and Conflict is rolling up with Seismitoad is emblematic of this, because Conflict has been a lot more involved in Generation 5, whereas the last time Malekith really played Gen 5 seriously, to my knowledge anyway, and as I've been observing, was when it was the current generation. Smogon Tour 16, the last official tournament with Gen 5 as the current gen. So, and he was very good at it then, and he was very creative, and because he was consistently involved in the tier, so he knew how to innovate within it because he was familiar with what was going on in it. But when you don't play a tier so much, and this happened with a lot of players who played Gen 5 when it was current, and then when it was no longer the current gen, they were like, oh, I don't want to play that nonsense anymore, and then they stopped really keeping up with it. Then, whenever they do come back to it for a tournament or whatever, then they'll say, oh, well, I don't really know what's being used right now, so I'll just grab a more standard team. So I think that's what has happened here, whereas Conflict's team... Now, I won't say Conflict's team is something that you never would have imagined before. It is still a very standard structure. It's a very good structure. That's why it's standard. Just with Seismitoad being a more unusual choice, which reflects Conflict's greater familiarity with the tier. So, why Seismitoad? Well, basically, with Refresh and an immunity to Volt Switch and Hydro Pump, then it completely blanks Rotom Wash. And it has, and it's a great Scald Absorber for annoying rain teams. And with Refresh, you don't worry about Tentacruel or Politoed Toxicking you either. And it has a litany of great moves, of course: Stealth Rock, Scald, Knockoff, Refresh, Protect. So you can find a lot of great things to do with it. I think I was experimenting with Gastro Acid a few years ago. I still think that's got some use to it. Just completely ruin something like a Poison Heal Gliscor switching in. So, or like Magic Guard Reniclus or what have you. So yeah, wherever the rocks are on Conflict's team, and whatever the movesets he's settled on, Seismitoad has a lot of good stuff to pick from. And with the Magnezone plus Spin combo, then you are putting a lot of pressure on standard Gen 5 Spike teams, like Malekith's. He's got a very advantageous matchup. Once that Ferrothorn gets trapped, then Excadrill gets a spin-off, or maybe it can get a spin-off, because Malekith's team, with Lando T and his own Excadrill and Keldeo and Latios, they're going to be threatening Exca with 4 of his 5 remaining Pokemon. or threatening to outspeed and KO it, rather. I mean, Exca might be a speed type, but still not exactly comfortable. Whereas X against T-Tar, then it's like, well, the T-Tar might stand and superpower me, but I'll get the spin-off. So he's got an advantageous matchup in that regard. Other than that, it depends on the Keldeo set, because Seismitoad can help check Keldeo, but I would really draw the line at calling it a true Keldeo check. The most you might get is like if you have a bunch of Protect Pokemon and you face a Specs Keldeo, and Seismitoad obviously absorbs Hydro Pump. In that case, sure, but most Keldeo are able to switch moves, or should be able to switch moves. That's when it's at its most threatening, and when that's the case, then Seismitoad tends to be a lot less reliable, especially if it's HP Grass. So, yeah, if basically it's on Malekith's end, it might not even need to be about, oh, well, do I preserve Pharaoh or whatever? Because Keldeo shatters T-Tar, Zone, Lando, Excadrill. Latios is, of course, pursuitable. And Seismitoad might not be a check. So it would be a battle of, can I get the Lati trapped? So that's an issue I often find with Lati on non-Magic Guard Psychic Spam teams, because I mean, yeah, Lati is always going to be a great Pokemon, of course, but sometimes you will not be able to avoid that T-Tar trap. And sometimes you need Lati on the team, not even just because it's the best Pokemon of the tier and is broken and everything, but because you need it defensively against things like Thundurus, or Keldeo. Whereas without Lati there, then, like if you put like an Amoonguss there or something, I don't think that team would be good at all, especially because it brings speed. So even something like Garchomp or Terrakion would become a lot scarier, because and having a Scarf on Lando or something would not really solve that. So Lati just is good there, but you won't be able to avoid that T-Tar trap, and you won't, and then you don't really have anything to take advantage of it. Like, look at Conflict's team. What takes advantage of T-Tar being weakened? On your standard Magic Guard Psychic Spam, then the synergy is, of course, well, nothing besides T-Tar can really can deal with Lati, right? So Lati forces in T-Tar, or it just KOs things over and over, win-win. But when T-Tar gets forced in, then it takes hazard damage, all that, and then it gets weakened by the Lati just to take it out, because otherwise Lati will just come back in and bomb you over and over again. And then when T-Tar's been weakened, then it can no longer take on Alakazam or Reuniclus, or, if it's Latios on a Rain team, then obviously you love wearing down T-Tar, so you have an advantage in the Weather War. But, this is a Sand team, it doesn't care if T-Tar is weakened or not, so it doesn't have anything to take advantage of that. And that's another reason why Keldeo is really scary. At least, if you had a Zam or Reuniclus backing it up, then be like, okay, well, Keldeo will be scary, but also Zam is going to be more terrifying. And the T-Tar will be too weak to stop me, so I'll have an advantage in that regard, so it's a good trade. So that's why a lot of players were saying, oh, well, Conflict is a good matchup when the team preview is revealed, and I gotta say, I don't fully agree with it just from team preview because of how scary Keldeo is. So, yeah. I mean, actually, speaking of the Lati T-Tar dynamic, Malekith has a similar thing because nothing on his team really appreciates Conflict's T-Tar being weakened. So, there's that. But there's, the whole Magnezone removing the steel to make it sure Lati faces T-Tar doesn't wind up doing anything here. I mean, that's a tough team to build, though, Zone and Lati, and then, other T-Tar weakened abusers, that's, you don't have that many slots. So, but yeah, I think you just switch T-Tar into Lati and remove it, and then I don't even think you have to risk the Ferrothorn. Well, no, I take it back, because Seismitoad is actually very good, not just because it stuffs like Rotom and, Rain teams, but it's also very annoying to switch into. Like, look at what switches into it for Malekith's team. Nothing really. Seismitoad's got good physical bulk. It can take on Lando, Exca. It's not scared of T-Tar. Keldeo doesn't want to try and 1v1 it at the beginning. So it would be, Ferrothorn gets trapped. Once the game gets going and the offensive pressure starts piling on, then Seismitoad is a lot more manageable. But at the beginning of the game, then yeah, that Ferrothorn is going to invite in Zone and get trapped by it, and then we go from there. Also worth mentioning that Landorus Therian, if it's just a standard, rocks support kind of set, is also very, but it always is. There's this theory I have where pretty much every team without like a Skarmory or a Bronzong is absolutely terrified of just standard Landers. It's so good. So yeah, that's basically it. Let's get into turn 1. There's Seismitoad and there's Lando. I can see why Lando let off, because but I guess actually I would say, I mean, Lando's a fine lead. I'm just thinking if Keldeo might have been good as well. Not maybe to just like scare Seismitoad a little bit, you know. And if it switches, if it protects, then you get in Ferrothorn for free, you know, without and if so, it's outside of something like a no, sorry, I had tracks running in different directions at the same time on that sentence. So yeah, I was thinking Keldeo just because it's such a threat. So you don't have to risk it on the first turn, of course. But, you know, it matches up well against T-Tar, Lando, Exca. Magnezone's not going to stand against it on the first turn. Are you kidding me? You know, so, and if Lottie leads off, then that's just, you know, begging the question of, does this get trapped immediately? And not that Conflict would necessarily, you know, fall into that, but I think putting on the pressure with Keldeo was a decent idea, whereas Lando here, because Seismitoad is also so good against so much of Malekith's team, so I think Keldeo or Ferrothorn were fairly safe. Actually, Ferrothorn, if you're gonna just accept the Magnezone trap at some point anyway, like by saying, remember how we were just saying, well, if Ferrothorn is, or once the game gets going and offensive pressure is flying around, then Seismitoad becomes a lot easier to deal with. And you are gonna have to switch Ferrothorn into Seismitoad. Because nothing else really wants to switch in, but it'll be fine once you get past that initial awkward stage of the game. It's kind of like dealing with Rotom Wash, which is very much like this. In the first couple turns, it's basically the worst Pokemon in the world to deal with. Once the game gets going, it's a lot easier. Seismitoad has much more longevity, of course, with its sand immunity and rocks resistance, but it's the same principle. So I was thinking, if you're gonna, you know, wind up getting Ferrothorn burned anyway, or burned and trapped or whatever anyway, maybe just lead off with it, because it's not like Conflict's going to lead off with its own, more likely than not. So you can, you know, get your spike and then start exerting pressure with Keldeo and Lando and all those. You know, or you can lead off with Keldeo. I think one of those were fine. Whereas Lando gets a little more contentious, because I don't think Conflict is leading off with T-Tar, like, ever. You know, because he really only needs the T-Tar for Latios. It's not like, you know, there's a bunch of other stuff he's going to be using it for. And Lottie isn't a big threat in that regard. You know, because it's not forcing any of those situations we were talking about. And, yeah, Lando's other only really good matchups are Magnezone, which, you know, again, Keldeo, or Excadrill. Excadrill is never leading off here. Excadrill comes in once the hazards are up, and once the sand is up with Sand Force to pressure. So, Lando's going to... Oh, he's just going to get up rocks. He's not afraid of the Scald Burn. Okay, you know... I respect that, for sure. If that was the plan, then that was the plan. So I can get behind that. And Conflict does not expect it to stay in because he goes for a knockoff. Which, I mean, that's not bad. I mean, obviously you would prefer Scald on Lando because you burn it and Excadrill just goes absolutely crazy. But then again, you know, once rocks go up, Lando already doesn't love switching into Sand Force boosted Iron Heads. And without lefties, then that gets even nastier. So I'm willing to... you know, make the assumption that maybe Seismitoad isn't the rocker, which is generally preferable, by the way. You don't want to put too much pressure on Seismitoad to do too many things. Like if you're trying to refresh off a burn against Rotom Wash, you know, and you want Protect to, so you actually don't wind up taking 6%. And even then, you know, you don't want to have that stupid choice between Rocks or Refresh. So, because that can spiral out of control very quickly against a good opponent. So, Lando getting knocked off is still, you know, good, of course. And now he's going to U-turn out, and with the Rocks up, so he's already going to be putting on a lot of pressure. And Ferrothorn gets knocked off as well, if he does just accept the thing. And actually, Seismitoad gets... I mean, see, this is what I mean. Like, the U-turn there, the knockoff Iron Barbs there, and, you know, Seismitoad's already chipped, so now it's off to the races after those first few awkward turns. So there's a double to Lando on a Protect. That's an interesting choice to go for Protect there. I have to assume it was covering more... Yeah, I don't know about Protect there, because if you're... There's no universe in which Ferrothorn stays in and Power Whips. You know, it's... that's just not a viable option. You either switch or you spike. Power whipping into Magnezone is definitely the worst, because it's like, oh, well, I power whipped into a Specs Magnezone and died to HP Fire, and then I didn't even get, a spike out of it. Not even temporarily. So if you're expecting, Ferrothorn to stay in, well, if you want to cover the Lando switch, or a double switch to anything else, like Keldeo, Excadrill, then you just use Scald, because, and if you are trying to cover that switch, and you still want to threaten Ferrothorn, then you definitely Scald, because you might burn it, and that makes Ferrothorn even less reliable. You don't even need to trap it at that point. It's lost its lefties, it's burned. You can just go to Excadrill and immediately start getting rid of those spikes. You don't have to waste Magnezone on it. You can turn Ferrothorn into a liability, if anything. So you either go to Zone on the spike or whatever, or you Scalds to try and catch a switch, and if it stays in, worst comes to worst, then why is my YouTube music playlist not working? Okay, let's go back to that. Sorry about that. Yeah, so you get my logic, though, while I rearrange the music, which is, for those interested, it is in the new background music playlist on my channel. Generally, I don't know what plays during the videos, because I usually put it on shuffle. So, but you know what, we'll just put it at the beginning now. So, yeah, I apologize if you want to find something in there. You have to do some digging sometimes, but it's worth it. I love digging for music. So, yeah, Lando's back in. Imagine that got scalded, So I don't think the Protect was the move there. The Protect winds up being nice here because extra lefties, and I get that he can afford to be a little, maybe not laissez-faire, that's not the term. He can afford to be a little cavalier against the Ferrothorn spiking multiple times because he's going to trap it and then spin. But at the same time, I don't think there was enough reward for that. Because, yeah, he staying with Seismitoad, trying to catch the double and, burning the Pharaoh, or trying to burn the Pharaoh on the spike or whatever, then that can also be, that will also get you the extra leftovers you're trying to get in order to offset that U-turn into Iron Barb's combination. Protect it was just, yeah. So that was the best move, and I am not going to repeat myself for the millionth time. And now, Malekith is not trying to... Oh, that's a... Okay, so that was a... Alright, so what this means is that Malekith is saying, I do not need my... Seismitoad is more annoying to me than keeping Lando perfectly healthy for the Excadrill. Because he's not worried about the damage at this point because he's not healing it off. It's more about the burn because that accelerates its demise later. I mean, Scald is not going to do... Actually, no, it's going to do a decent amount. Seismitoad's not that weak. Or more like Lando's not that bulky on the special side. But he's saying, look, if I weaken the Seismitoad, my Keldeo... I'm going to go out on a limb and say Keldeo does probably not have HP Grass if he wanted to EQ it that badly. I mean, you could also say, oh, what if Conflict doubled to Magnezone there? Which I think that would be... Actually, no, Conflict will never double to Magnezone there because Lando is using U-turn. So, no, I take that back. It'll get scouted first. So, that won't happen. So, what Malekith is saying is, I'm weakening the Seismitoad, and I don't care about the Excadrill because I will deal with the Excadrill by winning first with my Keldeo, which outspeeds it. And once Seismitoad is weakened, all it takes is a Latios trap, aka the easiest thing ever to pull off, or the most standard sequence in Gen 5. And then Keldeo will just sweep everything else, as we established. So I can definitely get behind that Earthquake. As, again, we're seeing it in action. The Seismitoad is getting weakened once the damage starts flying around. And Seismitoad can be great in terms of longevity, but, it's not getting... But generally, it doesn't need to last forever because it's getting a lot of bang for its buck with each turn, whereas that's not what's happening here. It just goes for another knockoff. And I'm curious about that knockoff. I mean, because surely, Latios wasn't coming in. Nothing else wants to take a Scald. Both Lando and Pharaoh are going to be knocked off here. So, yeah, I think that with the information we have now, then that knockoff seemed very unusual. So, the question is, well, he doesn't go for, well, that U-turn crits. I was going to say that Conflict does not go for another Protect, and I think he could have been greedy on that Protect. because there was very little reason for Malekith not to go for a U-turn. Because, yeah, okay, you can get Pharaoh in on the Protect, cool, but you can also just get more damage on him afterwards, even if he does Protect. So there's no reason not to U-turn. And I mean, do you really need to burn Ferrothorn coming in? So, like, even if Ferrothorn does come in on the Spike, then... Or, sorry, on the Scald, you know, if you do get the burn, great, but it's not going to really change the Magnezone dynamic. Obviously, you do want to burn it insofar as, hey, now I don't necessarily have to use Magnezone on it, but it's not really that necessary. So all things considered, and considering how crucial Seismitoad is to helping the anti-Keldeo effort, and just in general, you know, to help deal with the grounds, again, the whole Lando is tough to deal with thing is very prominent here, then, yeah, I don't think there was a reason not to Protect there, although that U-turn is a lucky crit, and now the Scald goes off, and now it burns. So, yeah, you gotta imagine that there was a reason for Conflict not to Scald on the first turn, because nothing else wanted to switch into it, so that Scald was maybe less hit the Ferrothorn and more hit the Lando trying to stay in, because he didn't expect the Lando to stay in. I'm operating with a little bit of foresight here, but you'll see what I'm getting at in particular. I'm trying to, you know, give what it would be live, or the live perspective, of course. But at the same time, you know, when thinking of explanations for why that could happen, this will reveal itself very quickly. So Magnezone does come in now, Ferrothorn losing health, and it's just saying, I'm going for the spikes. So Magnezone is leftovers, not a common item you see in black and white. You generally see specs, or that's why I think that Thunder Wave could have been, I don't know about that one. I think you just layer as many spikes as possible, because nothing really outspeed. Yeah, everything else outspeeds Magnezone, or it's T-Tar, which doesn't really care. Yeah, Magnezone in Gen 5 is usually specs, or more commonly like Air Balloon, Sunny Day. So to beat Rain Ferrothorn. So Lefty is unusual, but you know, some players have tried things like Subcharge Beam, you know, with Salic to get 2 kills. Basically, can I get something more out of the Magnezone after I trap the Ferrothorn? Not so much Skarmory, because you have to KO it more immediately, so you can't sub all over it, because otherwise it'll Whirlwind you. But against Ferrothorn, then yeah, absolutely. So with leftovers, then it's the same idea. So yeah, then Conflict pulls out. Remember that whole creativity thing? Well, he pulls out Barrier, so his defense is doubled, and now he Charge Beams. So he gets the 70% raise. I know it's a little less with accuracy, but that is the Charge Beam percent, special attack percent. Jesus Christ, that was bad. Sorry. You know, it's 70%. It's been that way ever since you first got the TM from Gym Leader Volkner in Sunny Shore City. So yeah, now he's got he gets another Barrier under his belt, and Ferrothorn is obviously not going to break that sub with Power Whip. And now he goes for another Charge Beam. Can he get it? So now you see where where it was coming from with that whole. Whoops, excuse me. I thought I paused it. Yeah, with that whole, he doesn't want to burn the Ferrothorn thing. You know, he's like, oh, well, why knock off? You know, nothing else switches into Scald. Well, if he burns the knocked off Ferrothorn, then he doesn't. If he doesn't burn the knocked off Ferrothorn, then he subs on it and gets +6 defense and probably +6 special attack as well, or almost surely +6 special attack. So when it's burned, then the Ferrothorn is fainting much more quickly. So Conflict was only able to get up 2 Barriers and 2 Charge Beams behind a sub, which still good. Don't get me wrong. He is going to be able to take out the. But yeah, like if he gets, he is going to be able to withstand an Earthquake. Yeah, Magnezone living an Excadrill Earthquake. Look at that, doing 75%. But you know, he is now 2-hit KOing it with HP Fire instead of 1-hit KOing it. You know, so if Excadrill has to be sacrificed just to break the sub, and then Magnezone is still at full health, then Lando is not going to be able to. I mean, I don't know if Lando dies to +6 HP fire. I mean, it'll come close at least. But, you know, Lando almost dying to +6 HP fire. Still, it almost dying to +6 HP fire. You know, Latios and Keldeo aren't going to OHKO it. Not even close. T-Tar, same deal. So, Lando would have gotten smacked very hard by that. And then Excadrill really enjoys that for conflict. And, yeah, I mean, the Keldeo dynamic doesn't change much. But, so ultimately, I don't know if it affected the core dynamic of the battle, of the matchup. But it was interesting to see, like, oh, he didn't Scald. And so Malekith's Earthquake wound up putting more pressure on Conflict to use Scald. And then that Scald wound up burning the Ferrothorn he didn't want burned. So that was cool to see. Nice to see Scald being punished. I hate that move. Yeah, so now in comes Keldeo, which can finish off Magnezone with a Scald of its own. And now in comes Latios. So Scald, Keldeo are going to be leftovers of some sort. We don't know the last, whether it's Protect. I mean, Protect is very likely, but then the others can be like Icy Wind or HP Grass or Taunt or even Roar, you know, is a good one. Or even Hydro Pump. Dual Water Stab is very good, so you don't, you know, like miss KOs on Gliscor, silly stuff like that. Or even HP Ice. There's Latios scaring out the Keldeo and doubling out on the T-Tar. That's another classic example. So Conflict really had to hope, yeah, I hope this Keldeo isn't Protect, or I am maybe not toast, but in a lot of trouble, especially because Malekith has maximum hazards. So it gets Lando in on T-Tar. And yeah, I mean, now, even though this is obviously advantageous for Conflict at first glance, then Sand being up means that, yes, Keldeo doesn't heal now, but Keldeo probably, or almost surely, has leftovers on that Sand team, whereas the Latios probably doesn't, so that means wearing it down is even easier, especially because Seismitoad is basically on death's door, so it's Lati is the only thing standing between that and, or between Malekith and Keldeo win. So, yeah, Lando scares out T-Tar most of the time, and then Keldeo obviously doesn't want to stay in or switch in and take damage, and Latios doesn't want to switch in, and Lando isn't a great switch in either, so it's kind of an awkward position. And the question is, how does Conflict respond? I mean, U-turn is a good choice because although Malekith switched first, so Conflict switched first, so Landorus wound up intimidating the Keldeo that was on the field. This is why paying attention to switch move order is very important. And so it's not like he can safely U-turn into Excadrill on a -1 superpower, let's say. Although that would be a very, very silly move to make, I think, because the Lando can just stay in and EQ you or set up rocks, and you go with superpower. So if you wanted to U-turn into Excadrill to guarantee you get that rapid spin off, which I think is actually a worthwhile goal to pursue, because if you get that rapid spin off, then Seismitoad suddenly becomes an actual Keldeo answer again. So you really want that spin. So U-turning there could get it done, and also prevents any, you know, Keldeo on rocks shenanigans or anything like that. So, you know, that's one way to do it. But EQ is viable. But I think EQ and U-turn, or sorry, rocks or U-turn are the most likely, because you don't want to be EQing into Lando. That's, you know, rocks and U-turn both cover Lando in some way. So, although, you know, U-turning out of Lando is definitely not as fun if you don't have rocks up, because then there's no pressure. Then basically all you've done is do -1 U-turn damage to Lando, and that doesn't make much of a difference at all, because then what do you even respond to it? You don't go to Excadrill against it, you don't go to Seismitoad against it, you don't go to T-Tar. Latios coming in is not great, because Malekith still has a full health T-Tar, and all you've accomplished is putting more rocks and sand damage on your own Latios. So yeah, actually U-turning out of Malekith's Landorus is very bad, because, you know, one of the few Pokemon that, actually pretty much the only Pokemon that Conflict really wants going toe-to-toe with his own Lando, or with Malekith's Lando, is his own Lando. He can stay in an HP Ice, he'll be at high enough health to heal it off, and Malekith's Lando doesn't have lefties and has taken damage, and Conflict's will be back at full health after this turn. So yeah, if anything, you want to go for rocks as the safest move. I don't think you want to HP Ice, though. HP Icing into Keldeo is just gross. Rocks is the best all-around move. So that's exactly what happens, and Malekith pops Ice Beam. And that is not an unseen move on T-Tar, but it is very rare, because you've got Crunch, Pursuit, and then Superpower, Rock Slide, T-Wave, generally things like that. Ice Beam is a great move for sure, no denying that, but it is undeniably difficult to fit, so it is not really unusual to see people surprised by it, as great as it can be. Because sometimes people will be like, yeah, well, I need T-Tar to check a lot of things. I don't need to be luring Gliscors and Landos and Garchomps with it, or D-Knights. When I could be hitting D-Knight just, similarly hard with Rock Slide, the same Rock Slide that lets me check Volcarona, Thunderous Therian, which is a huge threat, Tornadus even. So, things of that nature are more likely. So, but yeah, Ice Beam is obviously a great move, and it pays off big time there as T-Tar takes no damage. I mean, it was a risk, for sure, because if T-Tar takes a big EQ, then suddenly Conflict's Latios goes from basically worthless as long as T-Tar is alive and healthy to suddenly an enormous threat, which drops all three of Malekith's other Pokemon. But that's why it was a great move on Malekith's end, because he recognized on Conflict's end, yes, Stealth Rock is the best move, for all the reasons we just went over. So it was measured, and so very well done on that front. You could make the argument, you could go to Keldeo there, but Keldeo getting EQ'd isn't wonderful either. Although you could say it basically puts Conflict on the door of another KO. And you could also make the argument, yeah, but now Excadrill comes in and gets a spin-off, and you don't want that. And this is also kind of an ugly situation because, Lando on spin, great, but you don't want to risk T-Tar against the Excadrill here and just get EQ'd and then lose to Latios, so you pretty much have to go there. So, an argument could be made, yes, you KO'd the Lando, but maybe Keldeo was the better move there. But I think with the nature of the advantageous Keldeo dynamic to begin with, then, I think, let me organize myself. Look, you could definitely say keep the spikes as much as you can. You've got to pressure that Seismitoad as much as possible. And with the spikes up, then Conflict's T-Tar is actually pretty scared of switching into Malekith's Latios, so you gain another threat that way. So actually, the more I think about it, the more I do like the switch to Keldeo move there. So I'm not going to say that Ice Beam was bad because it did get a free Lando KO, and that frees up Conflict's own Lando as a threat. Because, I do say that. Actually, you know what? I'm going to chalk this up, to preference. Because I just said all that other stuff, like, yeah, maintain the hazards, whatever. But now you look at Malekith's Lando against Conflict's remaining Pokemon. Seismitoad at 38, that's not a switch. Latios switching into U-turn, good night. T-Tar switching in? I don't think so. So the only way Excadrill really helps curtail the Lando switch at all here is by Iron Heading, and that means it's not spinning. So, and actually even worse, it doesn't even go for Iron Head, it goes for EQ. So Rapid Spin and Iron Head both had their advantages, but EQ gets neither. I guess Conflict was afraid of T-Tar switching in and, of T-Tar staying in and superpowering it, but Malekith recognized before, the difference was, oh, he stayed in before, will he not stay in now to punish Rapid Spin? No, the difference is that Conflict had all the reason in the world to Stealth Rock there. And on this turn, he had a lot of reason to Iron Head, which also smacks T-Tar, and when you are smacking T-Tar with Iron Head, you are also opening up the possibility of a Latios sweep, because T-Tar is not taking, Sand Force super effective Iron Head from Excadrill, and then still being in good enough shape to handle Latios. So, it was not staying in there, and if it does, then you should kind of thank him. So Rapid Spin or Iron Head, both fine there. But EQ I can't agree with. So now in comes Seismitoad, which is a sacrifice. So yeah, whether it's U-turn or just EQ. And EQ is a good move there because honestly, you almost could sacrifice the Lando to the Latios to guarantee you get the pursuit off on it, and then Keldeo just wins. So actually, as a matter of fact, yeah, you always EQ'd there. It's not about, do I predict the Latios or not? It's, no, you force the Latios. This is a great example for, because I made that video a long time ago about, you shouldn't predict, you should just, play the situation, which obviously is an over-exaggeration because there's a lot of prediction involved in Pokemon, like this game in particular. But in this situation, where you have a win, the condition you need to win is kill Latios. you force Latios in, you let it kill your Lando, and then it doesn't matter that Lando can't switch into Excadrill anymore because the Latios kills the Lando, and then T-Tar kills the Latios, and then you just let T-Tar die, and Keldeo wins. So, and that's what you always EQ'd. So, nicely done. Malekith preserves the Lando in favor of his own Latios. I can get behind. It's the same idea, basically. You know, like, because Latios is not really as essential here to beat Exca and T-Tar, whereas Lando is better against them. So, sacking Lando or sacking Latios, basically the same thing. And if Conflict doesn't want to risk it, then, I mean, also fine. So, now T-Tar is going to switch into a big Draco, like, if it's choiced or not. And Malekith makes a great move by going for Surf. Doesn't quite get the 2 KO on T-Tar. Draco Meter might not be able to do the job if... Oh, no, it does. Just Surf. But Surf is a great move to not let Excadrill come in. And I mean, Excadrill switching into Draco from 73 with max hazard. Still probably not going to end up super well for it. But, you know, it can protect. It can do some stupid things. So, Lottie locked into... Oh, well, now I guess it doesn't matter now. Oh. Okay, well, I wasn't expecting that Latios to have conflict. Calm Mind, but that makes it more interesting. Although I don't know if it's fully... I don't know if it's enough at this point, though. I don't think it is. So, he's not going to finish off the Excadrill with... Oh, wait, you know what I didn't notice? What I didn't notice until now is that Excadrill does not have leftovers. My apologies. So it's Choice Scarfed. And that makes Malekith's choice... I mean, the idea is the same, which is, you know, if when it came to the Lando versus Excadrill EQ, then you still EQ every time because he was completely fine with losing Latios there. You know, sacking Lando, sacking Latios, functionally the same thing, because pursuit the Latios, the game is over, is the same idea behind them. But preserving Lando here over Keldeo is a good idea because of being as safe as possible against a Scarf Lottie late game. Or sorry, Scarf Excadrill in the late game. Even though I'm pretty sure he'd be fine either way, but you know, if anything, maybe you preserve the Latios. Actually, the Latios might be scarfed as well. Actually, no, the Latios is definitely scarfed because it didn't stay in Draco there, and it didn't do very much damage to T-Tar with Surf. So the Latios is definitely scarfed. So I think it doesn't even matter. So he's got the Lando, he's got the Scarf Lottie, he's fine. It almost doesn't matter what he goes to here, you know. But the Calm Mind makes things interesting because, oh well, I mean, he has to recover and get to really high health before he A, has a chance of maneuvering through T-Tar, and B, you know, is able to withstand Malekith's Latios' Draco Meteor, you know, even at +1. So he's got to boost a lot on this Keldeo, and even then it might not be enough. You know, even if we assume Colbur Berry to deal with T-Tar better. I mean, I do like the choice of Calm Mind here, just to give Latios more of a fighting chance against T-Tar, rather than just being obligatory Latios that gives this stupid dynamic against T-Tar alongside Keldeo. And obviously it's a great sweeper in its own right late game once steals have been removed by Magnezone. But yeah, we don't know what set... I mean, this Keldeo has Icy Wind, then, you know, who knows? Or if it goes for a Scald Burn... Oh, it has Taunt. There is Taunt indeed. And now the game is basically, you know, done because it can... Well, there's an unnecessary Draco crit, but I was going to say if it tries to beat Keldeo through surfing repeatedly so it doesn't weaken itself through Draco, then Keldeo's probably going to burn it with Scald. And even then, it's just not going to last well enough. You know, it's not going to ever heal enough for that whole surviving Scarf Lottie Draco Meteor thing. Or the T-Tar thing, really. So, yeah. Now T-Tar pursuits just to play it safe. And obviously it couldn't switch out because, you know, then it's just super over. So, yeah, Lottie going for Surfs and Dracos, trying to win, or trying to crit. But doesn't, and it does eat the Colbur Berry, but it's not enough. And now Excadrill comes in, Iron Heads, and here comes Latios revealing itself to be scarfed with Surf. Yep. So, that was a very interesting first game. Malekith is up 1-0. We go to DPP. Are they on the same? I'll switch conflicts. I'll switch their sides so they're the same throughout. So, We've got a Metagross lead from Conflict. We've got a Skarmory from Malekith. Very advantageous for Malekith, of course, no matter what a Skarmory is, whether it's more defensive or offensive. Rock's generally going to suggest... Well, I mean, it could be a fast... Actually, no, I take it back, because it was slower than Conflict's Metagross lead. And that means it is not going to be a jolly, offensive lead Skarm. With like Rocks, Spikes, Taunt, filler move, like Icy Wind for taunt leads like Arrow and Azelf. So it's going to be a standard defensive Skarm, but just one that leads off and has Rocks and Spikes to pile on the pressure. But it's not going to be a Skarm that tends to faint very early on, and that with the hyper offensive team. So instead, not that the team can't be offensive, but it's not going to be very minimal switching. No, even if the team is offensive, which is still a big if, then it's going to have a more of a backbone. So, I mean, there is also the possible explanation that it is an offensive Skarm lead, fast one, and it's just a Scarf Rocks Metagross, which is not beyond the realm of possibility, but I would say it's unlikely. Scarf Metagross is a great Pokemon, but you generally don't want to lead off with it, and you don't want to have Rocks on it. So, for many reasons. Scarf Metagross is at its best when it's Mash, EQ, Trick, Boom in the mid-game. Mid and late game. It's a wonderful Pokemon there. So, Rocks go up, and what is Conflict's response? Latios. If Latios is a switch into Skarmory, that's generally a sign of trouble. Because Lati doesn't... I mean, Skarm is sometimes used as a switch into Lati if it's specially defensive. And also, Lati does not threaten, these super healthy teams so well. Not that it can. I mean, Trick can get very ugly against a lot of common defensive cores. But, I mean, you don't want to just get, T-Tard right off the bat. And, yeah. So, I mean, the threats here are like Specs T-Bolt maybe. But, I mean, you get T-Tard. Trick maybe, you get T-Tard. And then, of course, you might double switch to catch the T-Tar, but you're double switching on the second turn of the game already with Rocks and Spikes on your side of the field, and you might not even scare the Skarm out. The Skarm might be like, all right, I'm specially defensive, I'll stay in. I don't care if I get tricked because it's a more offensive team, and I would rather this get tricked than something else, and I will just Whirlwind and force, and I'll reveal more Pokemon on Conflict's side, and I will spread more damage with Rocks and Spikes. It's not like it's going to be a Clefable defensive team at this point with a Metagross lead. So it's going to be offense. I want to see what I'm up against, what threats I have to be ready for. And I'll still have, if I get tricked, I still have a full health Skarmory. And if the Lati T-Bolts, then, okay, sure. But now I know it's Specs T-Bolt. And I can deal with that accordingly. So a lot of good options for Malekith, and pretty much no good options for Conflict here, which is why that's such a warning sign. And there is the Trick, and there is Specs, and there is Whirlwind. So in comes Jirachi, showing no leftovers, and HP Fire. Yes, that's HP Fire. So this could be a Super Rachi, could be a Mixed Rachi. HP Fire a lot more common on Super Rachi, though. So it hits well, but as we see there, that is a specially defensive Skarm, not taking that, maybe not even fully specially defensive. I mean, I guess if it is a modest Jirachi, because I was suspecting that, because I had noticed in some of Conflict's earlier games, he was using not exact versions of teams of mine that I had used in recent months, but, they were basically the same teams, and and I noticed in one of them there was like a modest Super Rachi or something. So I think he had been, watching that kind of stuff. And then he said after, yeah, he was watching the videos, which, I was flattered by, that he was taking inspiration from it. But yeah, and at this point I was looking at it and saying, I think he's using a team of mine from like 2019 or something. And then I was thinking, okay, the last is going to be, Rotom and Suicune. And yeah, so now T-Tar comes in, and it's going to be mixed, but because it has to be to pressure on that team. But it is enough of a specially defensive Skarm to withstand that as well. And look, it's just... I mean, it gets another good Whirlwind to reveal Rotom, get Rocks and Sand Chip on it, and now in comes Clefable. So, it's interesting because this is a very aggressively played Skarmory, and then there's a Clefable, which is like, oh, defense. But this is one of the beauties of good DPP, bulkier teams. You can still play them very aggressively and not necessarily as a stall team that needs everything to be a perfect wall at 100% health to function. I think that kind of flexibility makes them tougher to deal with because they're the opponent doesn't know how to come at you as well. You know, and if you're putting as much pressure on them, then you are really limiting, especially against a team like this. It's not like Malekith is facing off against a slower paced team where you really need Scar Armory. It's like, here, no, I want to get information, I want to get damage, and that's exactly what he did. And because when you spread out all this information and damage as well as he did, then with some, you know, relatively lucky whirlwind rolls, let's be completely fair, but even so, then he still would have, you know, revealed a good chunk of the team. You know, statistically, he was going to reveal a good chunk more often than not. And if not, he was still going to get a lot of damage going. And when you put that kind of damage on a team like this, then you limit the window they have to break through your defensive cores. Because a lot of defensive cores in DPP are very good with just a couple Pokemon. So it's not like you need 6 Pokemon which are elite defenders at all time. Instead, you just, you know, it's like, okay, my core of, let's say, Latias and Jirachi. You know, I just need to weaken a few. They're going to take on most things. I just need to weaken them by this much or that much. And so you get what I'm getting at. Of course, if you have any questions about this, then ask in the comments. But I think I made that point clear. Basically, just to reiterate it, I know I'm repeating myself a little. You don't need the full defensive 6 to function against. It depends on what you're facing, of course, but against a lot of teams, you're like, oh, my 2, 3, 4 Pokemon core will be enough, so let me play more aggressively, let me sacrifice this to get more damage on that, because then once I've weakened the Mixed Dragonite or whatever it is, then their options for dealing with my defensive core are basically nil. So you can, and arguably should, at least sometimes, play these defensive teams more aggressively, because, you know, when they're passive, then they're taken advantage of, and that's when the chips begin to fall, or the blocks begin to crumble, and when this way you are on the front foot. So anyway, Clefable T-Tar is against Soft Boil, is going to knock off, it just goes for a Seismic Toss. Great move there by Malekith. Again, really stepping on the throat here, just limiting the damage as much as possible. Metagross comes in, rocks, but like, who cares about knockoff here against, I mean, against defensive teams, obviously knockoff is the most broken move in the game, but against offensive teams, you want to be chipping them as much as possible. 100 damage? Yes, please. Rotom's not staying in there to just, you know, get chipped at more and more. You know, he's going to switch to something. Whatever it is, it's taking Seismic Toss alongside Hazards. You know, even if it's Metagross, then yeah, you wear that down, and then you... I don't know what your follow-up is, because Malekith's kind of team could go a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different ways you could do Scar and Clefable. But yeah, and T-Tar, now T-Tar dies to Hazards, so that's amazing. You know, and because of the way Healing Wish works in DPP, where Hazards come first, he can't even... Because Mixed T-Tar is actually a huge threat to a lot of stall teams, if you use it right. But now, Conflict doesn't even have the option of Healing Wishing to the T-Tar. So, he does get some use out of it, though, because the Clef is going to escape, and he smacks it with a nice Pursuit for 44. So, now the Malekith's Clef is under 40, and if his last is indeed Offensive Suicune, which makes the most sense, then it is... I mean, it could also be something like a Heatran, feasibly, but... basically some sort of finisher, some sort of special-based finisher, then, you know, to go alongside the very likely Calm Mind Jirachi, then, I mean, which is also a threat. So now the Calm Mind Jirachi and the Calm Mind Suicune can potentially get it done, although it also, if there's a Latias, is very likely to be the case, then, you know, you have to make your way through that. And Suicune can make its way through that. Jirachi, if it's not Draco Meteoring, generally needs T-Tar to do that job for it. So I'm not necessarily, the Calm Mind Jirachi can still potentially muscle its way through Latias. I've seen it happen. Had it, or I've been on the Jirachi end of that many times, and you know, what you realize, like with Ice Beam, T-Wave, Reflect, Latias, it's like, all right, well the Jirachi is going to boost a million times and then just muscle its way through you. So that kind of thing can definitely happen. It depends on the sets, of course. But it does require a lot of care to get the most out of T-Tar against defensive teams before, you know, you start getting overwhelmed and pressured, and you know the walls start closing in with the hazard pressure. So yeah, so that's a great turn for Conflict because he gets the huge chip on the Clef, and he wastes Malekith's Skarmory Death Fodder, so that's excellent. Now in comes Latias to revenge kill the T-Tar, hoping it's not Custat Berry. But it's very unlikely on that kind of team. I think Conflict said afterwards it was Chople, and that makes a lot of sense. Chople, you know, because Gengar is a real pain there. You could also make a very good argument for Lum. Basically, even like Pasho Berry, or not, no, sorry, not Pasho Berry, even Expert Belt, or I would even argue Black Belt on these kinds of teams, because you really need that pursuit to sting Clefable as hard as possible. Because at this point, if you're not going to pursue the Clefable repeatedly, also viable, but you know, you really got to, you know, do that, you got to execute that purposefully. And if you're not going to do that, you really need that to sting, and if you don't want the choice lock of Band, then you really, Black Belt's extra Dark type boost is really, really good. So Lottie reveals itself to be EQ, so probably EQ, Ice Beam, T-Wave, Recover, or not necessarily T-Wave, but very likely. You know, it could be like Roar or something, but that Lottie set is very, very effective on Skarmory Clef teams, because it lets it take on Heatran more or less, especially defensive Heatran in particular, with because you don't want to always just rely on Clef for it, because that can get exploited, and Surf will not do anything. Hits T-Tar, hits Jirachi, Calm Mind Jirachi in particular, so it's a big threat to that plan, the Calm Mind Jirachi plan. I mean, if it's Draco Meteor, Jirachi can still take it on one-on-one, but it's not like... Most of the time, Latias will beat Calm Mind Jirachi by like roaring it out and withstanding its hits, but with EQ it actually threatens it, you know, more directly. So, yeah, not that it can't be done, especially with Healing Wish, but it's a tough task. So in comes Metagross again, because EQ is bouncing off Metagross, of course, and in comes a Rotom, which takes... I mean, with Rocks and the Mash, it's actually going to be forced to heal fairly quickly, but not quickly enough. It can still come into Metagross another time. Yeah, probably. I mean, with a Mash Raise, it'll get ugly, but yeah, not yet, because the Metagross doesn't necessarily want to stay in. I mean, if it's Lumberry Metagross, I would say the best move is absolutely to just stay in and keep mashing, because you have to minimize your switches in situations like this. You have to take these like kind of uglier matchups. I mean, the problem is more probably that Metagross is his only remaining way of really hurting Clefable, so he doesn't want to auto forfeit if it gets a Soft Boil off, which is very possible. But I mean, he does still have another trick in the form of Rotom, and it doesn't look like Malekith. I mean, Malekith might not have a T-Tar there for Pursuit, so who's to say just yet? The Rotom trick could still be valuable here if there is no T-Tar. This is why the double trick combo is so effective. But with Latias, sorry, again, train running off the tracks into unrelated territory. But yeah, I think there is an argument, because the Metagross is very likely going to be Lumberry on this kind of team. I think it should anyway, just because you need the relief against status, not just against defensive teams, but offensive teams. So... yeah, Rotom comes in because you're expecting... Oh, and it gets Shadow Ball and KO'd. Well, you expect Rest Talk Rotom to be T-Bolt, Will-O-Wisp Rest Talk, but Shadow Ball Will-O-Wisp Rest Talk is also a great set that has been used on a lot of successful teams. And, yeah, that's what happened here. So Rotom... Conflict had the right idea. You can't blame Conflict for that. You know, get the Rotom in. Look, there's probably not going to be a T-Tar here. Let me get that trick off. And if you did get that trick off, then things might have been, you know, very different, you know, for that Suicune. But yeah, so I don't know. You could make an argument for both, but you can't blame him for that Rotom switch. It did seem good. Shadow Ball, Rest Talk Rotom. I mean, it's good even beyond the surprise factor, but the surprise factor certainly doesn't help, especially in a high-stakes environment like this. So in comes Latias again to threaten a Draco. There's probably going to be another Draco Absorber. It's not going to be Jirachi, it's going to be Scizor. And, oh, he doesn't even drop the Draco, he surfs, which actually does a pretty hefty chunk. So Bulky SD Scizor is a forgotten threat. Well, it used to be used on different kinds of teams. It used to be used on bulky offense teams. It's seen kind of a renaissance on these Skarm Clef teams as a late-game sweeper with great longevity, you know, very threatening once it gets going. A lot of teams that can't hurt it. That was Bulky SD Scizor's biggest advantage, that there's a lot of teams that just don't have fire moves, or they have very few fire moves. And even some fire moves like Jirachi Fire Punch don't necessarily KO it. So it can very quickly spiral out of control in the late game. Once it heals off damage is my... Yes, keep playing, please. It can heal off damage, and you can't really outlast it very easily. So it can cut through things like Clef, Lottie cores. You need some help against like Restalk Rotom and such, which is why, you know, sometimes hard to fit all the support you want, but it's definitely manageable if you've got like an Encore Clef on your side to mess up those kinds of teams pretty well. So what this does mean is that Malekith's last is almost surely going to be Magnezone or Magneton, because you cannot just get completely messed up by Skarmory, by opposing Skarmory. So the Latias goes for Surf, and it is not HP Fire as the original version of that team had. But yeah, so because that would have been devastating. Oh, and Malekith doesn't go for Root. That's unfortunate. That crit. That was a good move on Conflict's end, because you would think, yeah, that thing is going to stay in and roost off the damage from Latias just to stay healthy, you know. But I don't know. I think the Bug Bite was a actually, you know, I kind of like the Bug Bite. I like that it fits with Malekith's style of exerting pressure even with this defensively styled team. Like the Fable Seismic Toss from earlier comes to mind. And he's like, yeah, okay, I could keep it safe and heal, but again, I'm trying to close the gap. I'm trying to, you know, make this clock tick faster for him. And it's not like I need Scizor in pristine health. And I think that's a lot of that's a trap a lot of players fall into very easily, myself very much included, where you will, you know, think, oh, I need my defensive Pokemon healthy, so I'll heal it just out of instinct. Whereas you realize, okay, I don't need it in pristine condition. Yeah, I'll have to be a little careful, but the reward, you know, I wear down the Jirachi, you know, really make it even tougher for Conflict to come back. So yeah, I can, yeah. I mean, that crit is definitely unfortunate. Now, we don't know if it had Draco Meteor or not, so we don't know if it was able to take on Latias or not. And then Clef would have healed, but, you know, then there's no Latias, and Conflict still has Healing Wish, and that's the whole, you know, dynamic of these kinds of teams. And Metagross can get nasty with Weakened Rotom and Weakened Scizor, especially with a Mash Boost. So who's to say? I mean, I'm not saying it necessarily changed the game completely, but, yeah, definitely good for Malekith. So Suicune comes in. Suicune coming into Scizor back in the day was generally a sign of, uh-oh, I'm not doing so good against this Scizor. And, yeah, that Bug Bite does a pretty nasty chunk. Scizor's healing, and he's going to preserve it and go to Latias, which can take even a +1 Hydro from the health it was at, plus Sand, and it's faster, so on the following turn, it'll just be able to T-Wave, and there goes Suicune. Now, the full para definitely doesn't help. Now, this is not necessarily backbreaking if you've got Healing Wish, but actually, yeah, that full para does hurt, because now see here on this turn, then Suicune can still take hazards and get Healing Wish too. But with this EQ, as weak as EQ Latias is, it still does enough to a Suicune of all things that now Suicune cannot be Healing Wish to, because it'll die to hazards first. So it's pretty much Latias and Metagross against the world, which is unlikely that's going to come to anything. So Clef comes in and starts, I don't know that was the necessarily, I don't think it really matters, I guess. But yeah, he's just going to try and soft-boiled against a paralyzed hydro-pumping Suicune. The odds are very much in Clef's favor. I remember when Clef was first coming out of the scene, it's like, oh, it's not strong enough to withstand Suicune. It's like, yes, it is. Or bulky enough. So there's Mash. There's no boost. And it's outside. Okay, that makes sense. That because I'm used to offensive lead Metagross as being faster now, but Conflict's got an old-school, bulkier version. And he just goes for a Malekith's just going for Shadow Ball rather than Wisping, you know, into Lum uselessly, because it also hits Latias better. So Shadow Ball was definitely the right move, and he can rest here, you know, because that was a good move, because if he hits Latias, great. If Suicune gets sacrificed, so be it. Especially because he sees, especially because if he Shadow Balls their Metagross switches out, he doesn't take another Mash, so he's still okay. But yeah, especially now that we know that the Rotom is slower. I personally would be a little quicker to assume that the Metagross, which we didn't know before that turn, that the Metagross would be faster. So maybe I would have rested first. But I also don't know that it really matters, because Metagross has to blow up to take out Scizor, and then Clef and Magneton together are going to beat the Latias. So yeah, again, it doesn't really matter at this point. So yeah, there's Latias trying to avoid a Sleep Talk Shadow Ball to... Oh, he gets Sleep Talk Wisp. So now it's going to Healing Wish to Metagross, but it's not going to get the job done. Barring some serious luck. Not that it's impossible, but get a crit raise here and you're in business, maybe against the Rotom. But nope, Mash, Encore, and in comes Magneton, which crits uselessly because Encore lasts a long time in DPP. And the Metagross reveals itself to be Custat Berry, actually. And it gets a Mash boost a little too late as it KO'd Clef, but, because it's not going to get past Magneton anyway. Shades of Advance there. And Suicune dies to Hazards. So, we move on to Game 3. Are they on the same side? No, they're not. Yes, it should be like this. Okay, Hariyama. I love Hariyama so much. It's such a great Pokemon, and it's so good against bulky stuff. So, Celebi lead is very unusual. Generally, when you see a Celebi lead, you assume Subseed, because there are many teams that use Subseed Celebi that use it in the lead slot, because it's good at scouting the opposing intentions of things like, Metagross, is it banded or is it not? It's fine against Zapdos. But generally, you don't know what you're seeing. But so Malekith goes right for a Psychic, which is unusual to begin with, that a lead Celebi would just have Psychic like that. And he just goes for it against the Hariyama because, that's a good choice. And it's a bulky Celebi because that does less than half. God, Staff Hariyama is so good. And knockoff, well, Celebi doesn't have lefties anymore. That's, even if there's no sand in this game, then that's already going to be huge. Now it only heals through active use of Leech Seed or Recover. No passive lefties. And if there is sand, then obviously that's even better. So, I think that knockoff was a good move on Conflict Sim, because if the Celebi subs, then you just, Whirlwind it out after, if you do have Whirlwind. And because surely the plan is not just hope it's not Subseed, aka the lead Celebi set. But, yeah, that was, if you face a Celebi lead, then it's going to be, Subseed most of the time. And then you can see bulky teams that have a utility Celebi. Because, okay, let me just put this in the lead slot. Just with Leech Seed and whatnot, I can make the opponent think that it's Subseed for a second. And maybe throw them off for a few turns, and then I can get my game plan going. But you're not going to see, offensive Calm Mind Celebi in the lead slot, generally. Hey, maybe you could. I think it could work. I think Majin Tupac Z, one of the best advanced players ever from Germany, of all time. He was from Germany. And that was a big part of his game, because he would trash talk you in German. I think he had a couple teams with offensive lead Celebi. I mean, he had teams with everything. He was a monster team builder. But yeah, it was so. And Conflict is from oh wait, no, Malekith is the one using it. Sorry, Malekith is from Spain. So I was thinking, oh, is it a Conflict Team Germany thing? But no. Yeah. So I would hope that Hariyama has Whirlwind. Especially because if it's that bulky a Hariyama, it's probably on a bulky team, and those teams really need help dealing with Calm Mind Suicune, and Whirlwind Hariyama is one of the best ways they can deal with it, without going out of their way to do something stupid, because it's just naturally such a good choice. So, the Hariyama now is going to switch out to Blissey, and in comes Skarmory and Magneton. So generally, you don't see Hariyama and Magneton together. Not that you can't, of course, but the idea is that Hariyama's knockoff acts like a Skarm lore and, removes, its leftovers, which lets you deal with it a lot more easily. So you don't need Magneton as much. But, of course, there are plenty of good ways to use them together. So, Magneton is going to T-Bolt there, not quite get the KO. We don't know if that's Magnet low rolling or just an average roll from a modest Magneton. And Metagross gets revealed instead, and it's going to be faster, go for a mash, get back up to full, and Malekith reveals Milotic, so very bulky stuff. But, look, all I'm saying is, if there's any matchup that Hariyama loves, it's this. Especially because that Blissey's almost surely going to have Wish, if Conflict has indeed gone to the BKC school of Hariyama rules. And it's going to heal to Yama over and over, and just, he's going to blow up that Milotic. I was going to say you can take the slow route there too, but hey, there's often a Salamence on these teams. Now, I would have been probably a little more hesitant to blow up Metagross there, simply because you don't know that team does not have an Aerodactyl yet. I mean, I can accept maybe, if your last is Suicune, okay, yeah, we can deal with the DD Tar, maybe, and even then, I would, be a little hesitant, but Hariyama generally, okay, once you get the Wish off, it's probably fine, or if it's Claydol or something, But I don't know. I think Aerodactyl can spiral out of control very quickly without Metagross deterrence. So I don't know. I think that was a bit hasty, but I mean, it's not like that. It's not like removing Milotic would have been without benefit for sure. I just think you could have gotten a Blissey there, gotten a Wish off, and started making some stuff happen. But yeah, so in comes Mence against Celebi, and forcing Malekith to reveal a new non-Milotic Mence check, because Skarmory's not switching in. It's going to be a physical Mence of some sort alongside Magneton, and it's not Choice Band, my beloved, but instead DD. Okay, so here comes Magneton on... Ooh, that's a great move on Malekith's end. That was an outstanding... I mean, I'm... Actually, let me figure out where this is even coming from. I think... Okay, so Malekith was obviously under pressure to boom there, because I mean, we don't know the Claydol spread, but you generally do assume that faster Claydols are going to be 2-KO by DD Menses, even though people love their bulky DD Menses, but it's not like Conflict is a very trendy advanced player. He knows the metagame for sure, but he is not really going to be using like 16 attack EVs, refresh DD Mence or anything like that. Like very new experimental trendy stuff. So you just can assume, oh, it's going to be like a max attack DD Mence, it's going to 2-KO Claydol. And when Claydol booming on something is your last line of defense against it, which it looks like it is for Malekith, he didn't reveal a Blissey, which would have been a perfect answer to the DD Mence there. And I guess if it's CB, then you just are probably going to lose anyway at this point. But then... yeah, then you are in a bad spot. But Malekith knows, look, Conflict is not going to let his DD Mence die to Claydol Explosion. That is a very favorable trade for Malekith. And instead, Conflict is going to try to absorb the boom of something. And he's going to go to probably Magneton or something else maybe. But Magneton most likely because, look, Skarmory's weakened. Conflict can deal with the Skarm at 10%, even once it gets back up to 16 and then 22, I'm sorry, Jesus Christ. Once it gets back up to 22 with next switch in and then protect for lefties, because yeah, Skarm does that, but I mean, it's not going to be quite enough to get it out of that hole. I mean, with some insane playing maybe, but definitely more manageable at this point. So yeah, he's not going to need Magneton as much at this point. So he's willing to sacrifice it to the Claydol Boom. And what's good about this move is that if the Conflict stays in HP Flyings, very unlikely, but then okay, he HP Flying Magneton, fine. Now, what is not going to happen then is Conflict is not going to DD for free on the Magneton. So it's not like Malekith switched to a Pokemon that is completely setup fodder for DD Mence. It's not like an all or nothing thing. It's like, oh, well, I really hope that Conflict switches here, because if not, then I just gave him another DD and I probably lost the game or something. No, it's because Salamence is still, I mean, obviously Magneton is fearing getting obliterated by EQ, but you don't give it for free. You could theoretically just switch right back to Claydol on the follow-up EQ and be in exactly the same place you were beforehand. Minus some HP flying damage on Magneton. Who cares? In the grand scheme of things, that's nothing compared to what's at stake. And then you have the same dynamic, and then Conflict's really going to be under pressure, like, oh man, he's really going to boom this time because he's under more pressure, so maybe you can try to do it again, or what have you, right? So that's why it was a great move. That was a really high-level move by Malekith. I want to really emphasize that. So, Malekith now has a mag-on-mag trap, which, depending, it is faster. It's not quite going to get the KO. Neither of them are, but Malekith's mag is faster with lefties. Maybe it's timid, but they're both HP Fire. No HP Grasses here. Looking to catch Fortresses. And, yeah, so now Conflict has lost his Magneton effectively for nothing. I mean, it's not for nothing, I guess. Like, Malekith can't pull that trick again now. He can't go to Claydol on +1 DD and then go to Magneton and absorb the HP flying, because Magneton is now at such low health that it's not going to be able to absorb the HP flyings, the +1 HP flyings as well, even with that quad resistance and good defense stat. So, yeah, he definitely didn't get nothing out of that in Conflict's end. But I mean, obviously now Conflict is down, or Malekith is up 5 to 4, and then a boom will make it 4 to 3. Now, it's not as easy as that. Obviously, Scarm is on death's door, but the boom is going to be a lot more impactful now, is what I'm saying, no matter what it hits. You know, the next target is going to be like Hariyama or something, with Hariyama at half health, because Conflict is not taking the slow burn approach in this battle. And for the record, if that is a Wish Blissey, excuse me, and I think it is, Wish Blissey passes wishes all over Malekith's team to Hariyama, over and over and over and over and over, and it's eventually going to just crash. I mean, maybe the Hariyama doesn't have HP bug. I think it should on these kinds of teams. You got to put the pressure on Selby. But yeah, so I think that approach might have been more reliable, because, you know, then you play the slow game, and then you've got the can you imagine? You know, you're putting pressure on the Milotic and friends anyway, and then you've got the Metagross and the Mence? That's scary. I don't think Metagross needed to blow up the Milo to make progress against the Milo. But yeah, that's how it is now. So Magneton, so it is Toxic Protect, so it is going to get some lefties back. It's going to Toxic the Blissey, and that is actually... Toxic Protect Mag can be very annoying for Blissey teams. Hey, there's the Wish. There you go. Look at that. Healing reliably on Protect Mag like that. So, yeah, Mag was either switching or protecting there, and almost surely protecting, because you don't really want to risk switching into a T-Bolt with any of the other Pokemon, assuming the last is a Suicune. So, I mean, if it was a Claydol, then you would have gone to it in the first place, almost surely, because you want to get the spin-off as well. So, yeah, I don't... Sorry, I'm catching my train of thought. It's, you know, leaving the station. So, that was a great use of Wish. I mean, either way, it's a very low-risk use of Wish. But now Seismic Toss goes off again. He saves Magneton for the fodder. Just another... I think... okay, that Ice Beam actually does sting the Celebi quite decently, because it doesn't have left. I was like, why did it do so? Why did it feel like it did so much? It's not that the Ice Beam did a lot. I mean, it did do a good chunk because it's Modest Blissey, but it's more that when Celebi isn't healing with leftovers, then the impact is felt more. So obviously, you know, it gets a ton back from that Leech Seed because of Blissey's huge HP stat. Let's look at how much did it get back. Did it get back a cool 20% from Leech Seed? Wow. So now Blissey's at half health, but not really a problem, because, you know, it's Blissey against a very defensive team. In comes Mence on a Calm Mind. Now, I don't know if that Calm Mind was it. Assuming the last move is Recover. I mean, if it's BP or something, I don't know, because Mence is the response, and I don't know that Calm Mind really does anything there. I think Recover keeps Celebi healthy, or Leech Seed if you want to hit the Mence, but Calm Mind feels like it's not really going to do much of either. Because if you Recover as Mence comes in, then it's DD, so you can stay in, you can withstand a +1 HP flying. So then you can Leech and Psychic it and try and wear it down that way. You know, with clever switches, you know, you can even switch to Claydol, and it actually takes +1 HP flyings better because it's getting health back from Leech Seed. So then you actually wind up taking it better. So I think Recover was definitely the move, both to deal with the Blissey one-on-one better and the Salamence. I don't think you needed the Calm Mind there at all. So now here comes Claydol, and Conflict just goes right for HP flying. And actually does a very, very respectable chunk to the Claydol unboosted. So now in comes Suicune, and I mean, you could make a case that Suicune was the better... we don't know Malekith's last yet, though, and it's tough to... like, maybe it's... a lot of people, I think, were imagining Dugtrio just for the full, like, grimy effect of the dual trapping plus Magdoll. But, you know, Blissey, I think, would have come in, and, you know, nothing else really fits with that synergy. I mean, Arrow, also very possible. Arrow and Dugtrio were not completely interchangeable, but often, you know, they fit in similar types of slots. So, I think that would have been possible. And I guess that is a reason why you don't want to get your Suicune blown up by Claydol, unless you absolutely have to. So... but you could also say at this point in the game, you know, earlier on, no, it was better trying to absorb it with Mag. Good point. And at this point, you could even say, oh, Hariyama. So, but now you could say, okay, if the Claydol blows up my Suicune, and the last is and the last is Arrow, aka the worst case, then I will still intimidate it with my full health Mence, get a DD off, and then Mence kills literally everything. Skarmory can't withstand it, Celebi dies, Magneton dies, Arrow dies, so yeah, I think at this point it is almost worthwhile to provoke a, I'm not sure about that mag set. Not that it really made too much of a difference, because we're talking, DD Mence stakes here, but yeah, at this point, I would almost say it's worth it to provoke Malekith into blowing up your Suicune if you can get it, because that ensures a DD Mence victory. So you kind of want that Claydol to take out your Suicune. So the reason I understand the logic of Celebi not wanting to switch into an Ice Beam, but two things. Number one, this is going to be a defensive Suicune. It's going to be hitting with the, even if it does have Ice Beam, it's going to have an Ice Beam that's weaker than Blissey's, and Blissey's did 41, and Celebi is at 50. Also, this is another reason why Celebi should have recovered before. Would have been in a much better position. Second of all, I don't think that these kinds of teams really need or want Ice Beam Suicune. So, again, it's not like it was a major difference, but, it's better to have the sacrifice than not have the sacrifice. So here comes Celebi, here comes Mence, and there's the Leech Seed, so I'm starting to wonder, does this really not have... And a nice move by Conflict there. Dodging, so Claydol switching in, getting more lefties for sure, but now Blissey comes in for... Because EQ is not going to take it out, and it's going to be able to heal... Oh, it's not even going to be able to heal, it's just... That was a little on the risky side, I guess, but... Because Claydol EQs, you just needlessly lose Blissey. And I don't think that... No, Ice Beam does not do enough to Claydol. I mean, it'll do a nice chunk, but it doesn't do enough to lock down the DD Mence win condition. So I don't know if it was worth it over Soft Whale, or even Wish, arguably. But, yeah, I mean, you could also have switched Blissey into Celebi's Leech and not really had much change. I guess, no, if you're afraid of Dugtrio... No, that was fine. But, okay, so to avoid the Dugtrio on Leech forced Soft Boiled, okay, that's something else, I guess. But now I'm not really sure. Without the help of Spikes, I don't really think it makes much of a difference. So by the time Dugtrio is hitting your Blissey, you want to have DD Mence ready to rock and roll. But I think with... Yeah, the Ice Beam was definitely good, but it doesn't really make enough of a difference against the Dugtrio to warrant the... So I thought, okay, so it does have Recover. I don't know, I think it should have been used earlier. I mean, Malekith was definitely... His aggressive style was working more in DPP, but now I think that reluctance to use Recover is really working against him. And Blissey healing up passively with Sand here. And, yeah, now Mence comes in after several... Ice Beams forcing Recovers so that it doesn't... So that was really nicely done on Conflict Center, because, I mean, he doesn't really care about the Celebi gaining health. He just wants to Ice Beam it repeatedly so that it has to keep recovering. That way, Blissey can heal with leftovers, because as soon as Blissey doesn't hit the Celebi with Ice Beam, it uses Leech Seed, and that becomes more annoying to switch around. So he wants to heal, but he doesn't want Celebi Leech Seeding. So he keeps Ice Beaming the Celebi over and over and over so that he gets healing from leftovers while still forcing the Celebi to recover. And then eventually he gets his Blissey recovered and gets Salamence in on a non-Leech Seed. Beautifully, beautifully done. So now in comes Claydol again on another HP flying, and now the pressure is starting to be felt, but now it's just the same dynamic. I think you go to Suicune. Oh, I don't know about that one. I guess you could make the argument that, like, Suicune will probably win at this point. I don't know. I think that was risky. I think that was an unnecessary risk. I mean, okay, yes, you can make a lot of things about, oh, well, this puts more pressure on him to explode, and there was very low likelihood of him blowing up there because he still had good health, which is exactly why you could HP flying. Yeah, I can understand all that. I can appreciate it. But at the same time, I don't think it warrants the risk of Suicune, of Salamence being blown up and potentially not having your nigh-guaranteed game-ending sweep. You know, there's not really any pressure being exerted on you here. You know, you just do this whole Suicune, Salamence, Blissey dance repeatedly, and even if Dugtrio does come in, then that's just more Salamence opportunity. You know, you've got your Hariyama ready to go at a moment's notice as well. You just wish to it against the Claydol, which we know now doesn't have Psychic. It has Shadow Ball. So yeah, I don't know. I think that, I mean, it did work out, but I don't think that means it was a good move necessarily. So now in comes Hariyama on the boom. I mean, arguably, you could have just gotten to Hariyama in the first place. Like, who cares about Shadow Ball? I guess if you're afraid of EQ, but again, I don't think Suicune is that valuable now, because yeah, Dugtrio or Arrow. Look, you have that same plan. No, it's the same as before. Claydol blows up the Suicune, and DD Mence wins, whether it's Dugtrio or Arrow. So, yeah, I think that would have been fine. And now the Dugtrio comes in. I don't know that Dugtrio should have come in there, though. Because I think you had to go to Celebi, right? You had to go to Celebi because it Leech Seeds Suicune, it Leech Seeds Blissey, it Leech Seeds Salamence, whereas Dugtrio literally just gives the... I mean, unless you're just committing to flinching with Rock Slide or critting for the win. But, I don't know, I think Celebi was more... Because as you're about to see, then Celebi lives a +1 Leech Seed. This is splitting hairs, I don't think it really made much of a difference overall. But Celebi lives a +1 EQ. Leech Seed, actually, or +1 HP flying, good lord, fairly decently, you know, with 71. So what you could have done there, very, very possibly, is Leech Seed the Salamence as a DDs, and it would have been at what? Okay, 96. So you Leech Seed it there. I mean, this is going to be a tough task, obviously. But then you can, you know, you get back up to pretty much full health from the Leech Seed recovery, and then you can Psychic, you can recover, you can, you know, you can get something going. You know, you can sack the Dugtrio. Who cares about the Dugtrio at this point, really? You know, it's all about winning with Celebi and maybe Skarmory. Well, you do Leech Seed and then Psychic or Recover, whatever, and then you sacrifice the Dugtrio, and then Skarmory is going to come in and get Leech Seed Recovery and Protect. You've got Skarmory against these Pokemon without Magneton in the picture. You can Spike repeatedly and phase Suicune so it can't get anything too nasty going. You can put more pressure on Blissey. You know, Salamence is... We don't know if it's Toxic or Drill Peck, but if it's Toxic, then it's even better because it directly threatens Salamence. But even if it's just Drill Peck and it's just threatening the phase, that's fine. That's enough. You know what you'll do? You'll get Scar back up to 16, 22 just from lefties, and then 2 rounds of leftovers on top... Leech Seed on top of that, you're going to get a pretty healthy chunk back. So yeah, I really think Celebi should have gone there on the Leech, and then Recover or Psychic, either way. But definitely should have been that, and not just, you know, the Dugtrio route, which was basically admitting defeat. So, yeah, because that Psychic 26, you know, that's pretty good damage. You know, but yeah. So now, oh, we'll just see the last turn. Conflict is now on the board, still alive. If Malekith had won that game, obviously the series was over. It was 3 games to 1. Or it would have been 3 games to none. But now it is 2 to 1. Conflict still needs to win the last 2. And the next game is going to be his forte, GSC, whereas Malekith just needs to win one of the last 2. So, Snorlax. Curse, winning the speed tie, and that makes Conflict's Double Edge do less damage. Now, we don't know what kind of Curse-Lax this is still. We don't know what kind of Conflict could have a Curse-Lax, could have a Rest Talk Snorlax, could have a, you know, an all-out Snorlax. He reveals Steelix, which is saying offensive team. With Curse, Roar, EQ, Boom, you know, on Spike Shuffling stuff with Cloyster, you know, that is where Steelix exists. So Steelix is going to come in and take even Curse EQ Lax quite decently because of its huge HP, and it can, sorry, because it's a huge defense, and it can Curse first because it'll be faster, so it can even weaken the EQ if you want. You know, you wind up going one-on-one with it or something. Or you can just Roar. Actually, you might want to Roar first just in case it's Curse Fire Lax, which is a very rare set nowadays. But, you know, if you Curse and then you're slower, you lose the second speed tie, you just lose your Steelix for nothing. At least if it's Fire Blast, you've revealed the set and not given it more leftovers, for that matter. And escaped with minimal harm. And Steelix comes in and gets Lovely Kissed. So that suggests to everyone Mono Snorlax. Yeah, so when Mono Snorlax appears, Gengar comes in to spoil its fun rather than... whoops, I meant to pause. Yeah, when Mono Snorlax appears, Gengar comes in to steal its fun. Obviously, Pursuit is very likely alongside it, but in this case, it's preferable to flailing around with Steelix and hoping that... I mean, some players might argue, hey, just if it's Mono Snorlax, just stay in and, you know, Curse, and as soon as you Curse once, it doesn't matter how many Curses Snorlax has, it's not breaking you with Double Edge. So eventually you will just go second and wake up and get the Roar off. But Conflict chooses to go to Gengar on the second Curse and goes for a Hypnosis. So, and then he does not stay in and instead goes to Zapdos. and reveals Whirlwind as the Snorlax sleeps multiple turns. GSC sleep is very long, and Whirlwind Zapdos is a great Pokemon. It is very, very... it's hard to fit because you have to make up for its defensive capabilities against Nidoking and the like elsewhere, which is why Rest Talk Snorlax is very common alongside with it. But it's a ferocious offensive weapon because Zapdos matches up so well against so many Pokemon in the tier one-on-one and just scares so many of them out and barely anything answers it, and you just keep forcing them to switch into that answer, and you wear them down with... You wear down the whole team with spikes, and your repeated Whirlwinds. You know, that whole thing, oh, well, you know, GSC Spikes only does 6.25 after leftovers are gained. It's like, yeah, and you chain those together systematically, repeatedly, and you make a lot of damage happen. Put the opponent in very uncomfortable positions. So that is where Zapdos excels, where Whirlwind Zapdos excels, and Roar Raikou is more famous for this in GSC terms, for similar reasons. But Zapdos has the advantage of being Spikes immune, so it is because sometimes even Skarmory can be annoying with Whirlwind for the same reason. Oh, it's Spikes immune, and it's dragging in a bunch of non-Spikes immunes. But obviously Skarmory is nowhere near the offensive threat Zapdos is, so it's pretty much the best Spike shuffler in the tier. So Zapdos comes in. Oh, sorry. Let me go back there. So Gengar comes in. Gengar does not want to 1v1 a fully healthy Zapdos, especially not a Whirlwind Zapdos, because they are known to run Thunder Wave. I mean, look, you can heal off Thunder damage or T-Bolt if it's one of those, unless Thunder Paras, of course. But Thunder Wave, that's just not worth it. You know, guaranteeing the Para, because at least Thunder Para, that's only a 21% chance, and you know, with Thunder Wave, it's a lot higher, of course. So now Malekith goes to Steelix on the assumed Thunder Wave or Thunder or what have you. It wasn't going to be a Whirlwind, or it wasn't going to be like HP Water, that's for sure. And Conflict makes an amazing move there and goes to Cloyster, anticipating that, you know, it could have been Snorlax, could have been Steelix, basically the Pokemon, the ground type. You know, the switch to... On offensive teams like this, Raikou is much rarer, so you can do that whole thing where Zapdos draws in Snorlax or a ground type, and either way, you double switch to Cloyster and have the advantage and get your Spike. It's a classic GSC sequence, one of the most fundamental of the tier. So he's got that going, and in the rare instance that Gengar did stay in, it's not like it was going to be targeting Zapdos with an electric move. It was going to be using Ice Punch. So it's like, oh, whoa, the Gengar used Ice Punch. Okay, well, Cloyster quadruple resists, and no harm, no foul. I can deal with this. But it was very unlikely. So that was a really excellent move by Conflict. So, and now he's got the advantage, so he's going to get that free Spike, as Malekith, of course, comes in to match it with his own, with Cloyster, and he gets the Toxic off, and he even wins the Speed tie with that Toxic, so actually, that doesn't really make a difference unless Cloyster stays in and takes more Toxic damage after, but it does mean, as you saw there, that the Cloyster, because of the way that GSC Poison works, it's not like it doesn't matter in later gens if you Toxic second or first, but in Gen 2, you only take poison damage when you make a move, like when you switch in or you use an attack. So, if Malekith's Cloyster had used Spikes first, and then gotten hit with Toxic, it would have already moved for that turn, so it wouldn't have taken damage. Yeah, I love Gen 2 mechanics. I'm being serious, by the way. So, yeah, Zapdos comes in, and on the... Yeah, so that's a great move by Malekith, because Conflict is... Well, the answers in that Cloy-on-Cloy war are... Okay, well, Malekith's Cloyster is obviously not going to boom. It's going to Toxic or switch, but, you know, probably Toxic. Try to match the status on Conflict's Cloyster. This is why getting the upper hand with Cloyster early game is such a big part of GSC. Not a deciding part, you know, the impact is not that big, but it does provide tempo, which sets the pace for the rest. So, yeah, now you've got... so Conflict goes to Gengar there, and the reason Malekith goes to Zapdos was because it has a decent 1v1 against Gengar, especially because Gengar's taking Spikes. Hey, no Levitate, no abilities in this gen. And if Conflict does go to Zapdos, like, oh, we'll go to Zapdos. Well, first of all, you're a lot less likely to go to Zapdos, and I would even argue that once you've got a non-rest Zapdos, because Whirlwind Zapdos can run rest, but on an offensive team, you don't really want to be giving the opponent 2 free turns. Not that it can't be useful, but it's very tough. So generally, you will want something else that can switch into Toxic from Skarmory and Cloyster, especially Skarmory. And because that can also take the form of Rest Talk Raikou, for example, which is a wonderful Whirlwind Zapdos partner. But it's with Gengar, then you absorb Cloyster's spikes, and you do that thing where you switch into Cloyster without fearing Toxic or Explosion. You know, Cloyster has such a great boom because pretty much nothing besides normal resist don't really love switching into its Surf, so things like Rocks and Steels aren't coming near its boom, so it's going to get a good target most of the time. And Gengar has a good enough special defense stat and isn't afraid of Toxic either, so it's not afraid of a middle ground. So it doesn't love taking Surfs repeatedly, obviously, but it can take them a few times. And so it's as sturdy a Cloyster switch as you need for these fast-paced offensive teams, where you're not trying to take things perfectly, you're trying to take them well enough. So so that's why it's very likely that Gengar is going to be there, and it's going to switch in on that turn. Gengar had already been revealed, excuse me. So ignore that last part, but in general, when you look at team compositions like this, then yes, Gengar, if there was just a Whirlwind Zapdos, then that still applies. It was very likely there was going to be a Gar there. But especially alongside Steelix, you're generally not going to see Steelix and Raikou together, because Steelix's whole thing is being a normal check that also checks, or is neutral to HP Ice, and you don't really need that as much if you got Raikou, so you can use something else like Tyranitar or Golem. So Cloyster comes in, spikes, and so Conflict, excuse me, Malekith and you, Gengar's probably coming in here on the Toxic, and or possibly Zapdos. But Whirlwind Zapdos does not face off against what is assumed to be Malekith's more standard Rest Hog Zapdos as well, because it does not heal off the damage. Whereas, you know, you can have Zapdos Wars, but then they heal up, and it's like, okay, fine. But, you know, with Whirlwind Zapdos, when you're playing a more aggressive game, then, yeah, you have the greater offensive pressure of Whirlwind, of course, best Spike Shuffler in the game. But you also have the downside. It comes with the trade-off of not being as good in terms of longevity, shrugging off hits and status. So that's why the whole Gengar Toxic Absorber thing was so particularly salient. Not that Gengar isn't always on these teams anyway, even with Rest Hog Zapdos, because of the whole Cloyster absorption of it all. And help against Fortress is a really big one, especially against Steelix, the biggest Fortress bait in the tier. Or some of it anyway. So, but yeah, that's the point I was trying to make. And yeah, Zapdos will face off well against the Gengar. You don't want to throw away Gengar just yet, most likely. Or, you know, we see it's not a Thief Gengar. That's, I mean, it could have been Thief still. Hypnosis Thief is not unheard of, but it's unlikely. But yeah, so Zapdos into Gengar there is a great move, because it, that was the other reason, sorry. It wasn't about the Zapdos one-on-one as much as if Conflict stays in with Cloyster and pushes the issue with Surf, as in, I'm going to hit you with a hard Surf as you Toxic, because Cloyster Surf actually does pretty good damage to other Cloyster. If you're going to do that, just to get like a kind of cheap shot on me, then I will absorb it with Zapdos. But you're either surfing or going to Gengar, and Zapdos covers both. So that was a very long-winded way of getting to that. So, now Conflict is going for Ice Punch to put some pressure on the Zapdos, because he doesn't want to switch in. With Sleeping Steelix, then he's not able to... I mean, Steelix has the issue of not really pressuring Zapdos that well in return anyway, without booming, which is obviously very risky. Of course, Steelix does get a lot better once the opposing Cloyster is Toxic. And now you can start wearing it down more. You can punish it for switching it with Toxic and Roar, which does 25%, basically a super effective Stealth Rock hit. Yeah, you got to work for that super effective Stealth Rock hit in this gen. And, yeah, you don't love switching Snorlax right into Thunder. I still don't know that that really warrants the Ice Punch, though, because it's not like Gengar's getting 3-hit KO'd in return. It's getting 2-hit KO'd. So, I mean, the Thunder does little enough damage to where it's forgivable, but then there's, of course, I mean, look, the Thunder para risk is not enormous, but it's also not something you can really ignore. And indeed, I mean, Gengar can also freeze, and if we're taking every status or percentage into account. But yeah, man, I mean, it's now Gengar is basically out of commission. Not to say that Conflict still can't get use out of it, but it's going to be very difficult now. And Malekith basically got given the Gengar for free, and now he's basically doing. See, that's why I don't really love that Ice Punch there, because he's basically doing the. Conflict has to make the same move anyway here, which he was going to have to anyway, even if he doesn't get paired with the Gengar. It's like, he's not going to blow that Gengar up immediately. You know, I mean, unless maybe he was, but I still don't see that happening when a switch to Steelix is so viable a choice for Malekith. Because Steelix can switch into Gengar decently and threaten it out and start roaring, and it can also one-on-one against 1v1 Snorlax. That's the whole purpose of Steelix, to 1v1 Snorlax. So with a Steelix switch such a viable opportunity, I don't know why he would do that. I mean, I guess the Ice Punch was maybe to try and catch the Steelix switch. I mean, it's a good thought, okay. When you look at it that way, then it is a lot more reasonable. Like, oh, I want to be okay against the Gengar, and I also want to catch a Steelix double, which is very reasonable into Snorlax. But, so I'll Ice Punch there, but I just don't think the rewards outweighed it, because, yeah, you Ice Punch the Steelix, okay, that's cool, but with Untoxic Cloyster, a Whirlwind Zapdos, which ostensibly has HP Water. Actually, that really makes me not like it even more, because HP Water Zapdos into Steelix is the ideal matchup for Zapdos, because now, look, Malekith's got a sleeping Snorlax, which is not going to sleep talk, and he's got a Steelix against an HP Water Whirlwind Zapdos team. So, you don't have to worry about wearing down Steelix as much. It's going to happen just by Malekith naturally responding to Zapdos. That's why Zapdos is so broken. No matter how you respond to it, it's going to, mess you up just by doing what it does always. That's you can't stop it even when you know it's coming. So, with that in mind, I don't think he needed the extra damage on Steelix, especially because, I mean, we don't know what this Snorlax set is, but I think it's fair to say that maybe it has some way of hurting Steelix. It's not like Steelix is a big threat unboosted, and he's also got an Untoxic Cloyster, so there's really very little threat here. So I think, yeah, okay, you don't love switching Snorlax into Zapdos Thunder, fine, but you were going to have to do that anyway. And the downsides of losing Gengar were just not there, in my opinion. So I'll stop myself there before I start explaining the whole thing again. But I hope that made... No, it made sense, Kev. Relax. Yeah, so seeing as even if you get that Ice Punch, then, well, okay, you're not going to Ice Punch again. You're going to switch the Snorlax. So all you're doing is weakening your Gengar, which is not healing that damage off because it takes spikes. And the Zapdos is healing that damage off a lot better because it doesn't take spikes. So that was a new idea to the discussion. So Snorlax comes in and it misses Thunder anyway, so in comes Steelix. I mean, it's an EQ Lax, so even less of a problem there, so yeah, it's it gets a crit on the Lix, sorry, Lax versus Lix, and Lix is now under a lot of pressure to blow up. Yeah, and as soon as it blows, I mean, not that, it's in good condition to fight against Zapdos anyway, but yeah, it's not like this is a Lax completely walled by Steelix. So in comes Cloyster, and Malekith goes for Roar. That's a nice move on Malekith's end, because he's under a lot of pressure to blow up, to do something, but rather than hastily just play into Conflict's hands with a Forced Boom. The Forced Boom is the easiest one to take advantage of and make sure it does nothing. And Conflict is like, look, I'm not risking the Snorlax. I can't risk Snorlax right after I, risk my Gengar. So Malekith keeps that in mind beautifully and executes a very nice Roar and drags in Zapdos. Okay, so you got some chip on Cloyster. That's nice. Unfortunately, here comes the Zapdos, which he knows is going to have HP Water. And he runs away from it and goes to his Snorlax, which has slept a couple turns, and Conflict makes a beautiful Whirlwind. He knows, look, Malekith knows I have HP Water. This is not like some new player who doesn't know that HP Water exists on Zapdos, or on Whirlwind Zapdos in particular. Because Rest Talk is not going to run HP Water. It does very rarely. But on Whirlwind, you assume it. It's a standard. So he knows it's going to HP Water, and I'm just going to Roar anyway. And that's a beautiful move to rack up chip on Snorlax. And now in comes Malekith's own Gengar. Now, what's the move? Because Gengar, and it reveals that it does, in fact, have T-Wave. The other move slot in the Whirlwind Zapdos moveset is usually between Drill Peck for Exeggutor, so you hit both Exeggutor and Steelix. So they can't be like, oh, well, that Zapdos doesn't have coverage for Eggy, so I can check it with that. Drill Peck, or the second electric move. So if you've got Thunder, you also run T-Bolt, and vice versa. Which is a lot better than it sounds, because, oh, I'm thundering the Zapdos down with all this extra power, and now it's at 15% and I missed, and now it rested. You know, so look, power and consistency, very valuable. Especially in longer games when Thunder has only 16 PP, which I know is a lot in modern gens, but in old gens when there's a lot of rest, then you might burn through that very quickly. So double electric stab Zapdos is very good. But here it is, in fact, Thunder Wave. We don't even know it's electric. We saw Thunder Wave before we saw which electric stab it is. That's funny. So yeah, Gengar's Boom is not strong enough to KO Zapdos from full health here. So no matter what that Gengar did, it was not going to mortally threaten the Zapdos there. So that Thunder Wave is a more direct... I mean, talk about evening the score. You would paralyze Malekith's Gengar there and make it similarly exploitable for the EQ Lax in particular, and the Cloyster. I mean, it's not going to be as weakened, but it's a lot more easy to take advantage of now. So, yeah, there's T-Wave, and failing as Snorlax comes in and gets Whirlwinded in again. And in comes Steelix again. And look at that. No, now Steelix is back in. It's going to have to run away again. And it's so it's making that 6.25% work over and over. And now Conflict goes for Hidden Power just to show, yeah, I do have it. Just to prevent Malekith from going, okay, I'm going to call his bluff and assume he doesn't have it at this point or something like that. So now Malekith, he's in Malekith's head more like, yeah, it's guaranteed I do have it. Snorlax, again, still sleeping because GSC sleep is very long. And he's getting another Whirlwind on the licks. And again, not really good switches. This is why Zapdos is so good. You don't want to switch to Gengar. You can't switch to Zapdos, you know, which is going to be barely over half health. You know, that's not going to work out. Cloyster, forget it. And the last, whatever that last is, you know, the standard options like, you know, Jinx or Vaporeon, Machamp, whatever that is, it's not a Pokemon that loves taking on Zapdos. Zapdos is such a gatekeeper because it, you know, stops, I mean, pretty much all of OU, so it's not surprising that, you know, the sweeper types are not going to do particularly well against it. But, yeah, it's, whatever it is, it's not going to love switching into Zapdos here, which is why Snorlax keeps coming in, keeps getting worn down. It's just trying to get a rest off. And still sleeping, and in comes Gengar again, so Spike's running all over the place. In comes Snorlax again on the T-Wave. No, oh, and that's a great move on Conflict's end. He finally reveals his Electric Stab. It is T-Bolt. And this time knowing, look, Malekith, Gengar's a playmaker, and the value of these Pokemon is shifting as they take more damage. You know, every turn makes Pokemon more or less valuable. You know, when damage is being done, of course. So at this point, like, look, I need to preserve my Gengar because Gengar is fast and has great moves and can make a lot of things happen. So I would rather not risk it against the Zapdos. I'd try to get Snorlax back in. You know, at this point, Malekith is due to wake up because he's slept so long, and he wants to absorb that T-Wave, and Conflict reads that and T-Bolts and is going to take home. So now the Snorlax is dead. And what's more is that, well, actually, I guess it's not that big a deal in terms of Sleep Clause is no longer active because Gengar is going to be at under 40% after Spikes and Lefties, and it's paralyzed. So, and hitting Hypnosis through Paralysis, yeah, okay. So at least Zapdos comes in now, and it being T-Bolt Zapdos on Conflict's end means that it doesn't threaten to 3-hit KO Malekith Zapdos in the same way that Thunder does. So he unleashes Thunder, finally hits the Snorlax, and that connects for a solid 29%. And now in comes Steelix on the rest? No, it's going to double edge, just playing very aggressively, knowing... I mean, that's a good move. You don't want to give Cloyster or Steelix a free switch, and you can still switch in... Well, at this point, you don't really want to switch in as much. So we might have to, you know, finesse a switch in later on of some sort. But I think that was more in the sense of I don't want Zapdos... if I'm going to rest, I want to get something out of it. And what he would get out of it would be resting on the same turn as Zapdos there. Because if Zapdos Thunder's there, it's still not breaking its way through Snorlax necessarily. And it's going to take a very hard-hitting double edge in return. So then the Malekith's Zapdos is going to either be, you know, in dangerous territory for Conflict Zapdos, or his Zapdos is going to be forced to rest, and if he rests as Conflict rests, then Conflict's rest is a lot less exploitable. So instead, he just finds that double edge connecting with Steelix, and now it's a speed tie. Is he going to boom? He does, and Gengar, the paralyzed 26% Gengar, 28%, sorry, 28% Gengar absorbs it. So he manages to get some use out of it. So, amazing use, after all. It was a good move there, not because he's predicting explosion necessarily, but because Steelix is at such low health that it's, again, guaranteeing a condition. That, look, you can EQ that Gengar on the Switch, which is a tough move to make when you're this far behind, by the way. But even if you do EQ that Gengar, okay. Now Zapdos comes in and collects another KO, or very close to it. So, it's a worthwhile sacrifice, since Conflict would still be ahead. You know, this just makes him more ahead. But, seeing as the Gengar is... you know, about to get Revenge Kill anyway, I don't know, that makes too much of a difference. A T-Bolt just barely lives and goes for Hypnosis again. Now that one I think was very unnecessary, actually, because yeah, okay, I get it that you're just gonna. I mean, we don't know what the last is yet, but if he was hypnosising there, he was either really desperate, which is harder to imagine, or really confident with whatever that last is. So, but either way, I think, you know, sleeping the thing. The odds are so low. Just Thunderbolt it, Ice Punch it, whatever. Take your little bits of damage on it so that Zapdos can threaten it more directly later when the Gengar switches out after you force it out with your last Pokemon or your Snorlax or what have you. You know, so I think that Hypnosis was very, very, very greedy. So, kind of glad it didn't connect in that way. So, and then Conflict reveals the Alakazam. Now, you could say, oh, well, the Alakazam is obviously going to threaten Gengar, so he didn't need the extra damage on it. Well, you still needed the extra damage on it for other Pokemon's sake, like putting in Snorlax EQ range or Zapdos T-Bolt range, something like that. And also there's the fact that, if I remember correctly, I think Gengar at very high health can survive Alakazam Psychic. Maybe not, you know, as reliably, since at 94, which is really 93 point something, because Showdown rounds up, and what it shows is actually less. It's very important to remember for damage rolls, by the way. If you're trying to see, oh, will that Pokemon at 28%, you know, die to this move that does, you know, 27.5% minimum? Well, you know, that Pokemon is very likely closer to 27.5 minimum than 28. Because I've even seen like 27.1 displayed as 28. Because I guess it's technically true, because you can't show it as 27 when it's really more than 27. So you got to go all the way up. Anyway, so Alakazam comes in here, and what we got to notice about it is that it is female. And this is already making the people who have noticed it wary, because in Gen 2, it's a very sexist mechanic, but the attack IVs, Pokemon are male by default, with the exception of Miltank, which is always female, and Blissey. But most Pokemon, you have the choice, male or female. You always make them male, because I don't remember the exact mechanics right now, but I know physical attackers definitely don't want to be female because their attack IVs are lower, or their DVs in Gen 2, which is like, yeah, okay. And I think I know in the past there have been like female attract Miss Dravises, which don't mind it as much, and are just trying to cheese mean look attract Perish Song stuff. But yeah, generally you don't see female Pokemon. So when that Alakazam comes out as female, then it makes you think, if you notice it, and you know about this, about the whole IV-DV thing, you're thinking, oh my god, it's going to have attract. Yeah, so in comes Zapdos, and there's a sub, so even if Gengar did stay in to try and live the Psychic, then it was going to blow up, so it would have blown up into a sub, so big deal. Now, sub Alakazam, I think Alakazam is already a great, okay, sorry, I didn't want to reveal that already, but Alakazam is already a great Pokemon in general, just with the set of Psychic, Recover, Fire Punch, then like Toxic, or Encore, or, you know, something. Ice Punch, Dynamic Punch, whatever. And yeah, you could throw sub into that mix to do what sub Pokemon like Starmie sometimes does, which is, if Zapdos is going to try and spam Thunder against you, then you will just sub on them repeatedly. I mean, sub Recover is horrifying, especially in a gen with 32 Recover PP. So, but Conflict is not trying any sub Psychic, Fire Punch, Recover kinds of things here, which Restock Zapdos would actually do okay against. It's when, you know, other factors start getting introduced that Zapdos falters against Zam. That's why Zam is good, because it can mess with Zapdos, beyond just hoping for crits and special defense drops. But the problem is that this thing is using Swagger, And this should be, this is a move that just should be banned in generations where confusion is 50% to hit yourself. So I don't really have anything to say about this other than it's stupid. And I think myself, and I think M Dragon also, and I like Issa as well, and basically like other GSCers were kind of disappointed in Conflict for bringing it, because like Conflict, you are one of the best GSC players ever. Why are you bringing something so cheesy and, you know, basically relying on the RNG? Like Alakazam, a normal Alakazam set could have been just great here. I mean, this is a great matchup for it. This is exactly, the team would have functioned the exact same way. You just use a regular Alakazam set, and instead you use this. I think it's, you know, kind of, and then you realize it's female, so it's not just sub Swagger Alakazam, it's sub Swagger Attract, aka, that's, yeah, definitely, yeah, I mean, do what it takes to win, etc., etc. But I'm not taking away the use what it takes to win mentality. I'm saying when you are this good at GSC, it is stupid to leave the game up to RNG as opposed to something in your control when it is, which is a philosophy I have in general, but especially when you are, you know, I don't think anyone would argue that Conflict is advantaged in this GSC matchup, as he is in most GSC matchups. So, yeah, I think that was a waste, and it's not always about the end result. I mean, the end result is all that matters when you're battling, but in terms of how players assess you, then, yeah, it's also how you play the game. So, yeah, and then Cloyster switches in as Zapdos gets... What the hell? Oh, I skipped way back for some reason. Yeah, so crits, and it crits but F drop, but it... You know, at that point, it was not looking so great anyway. I don't know if Attract works on genderless Pokemon. I assume yes, but I assume he just wanted to attack and make most of Swagger. Or I assume if he didn't use it there, he probably didn't. Anyway, so now this is sacrificed, and Malekith reveals his last Espeon, which has a very similar function as this fast Psychic type. Very similar function to Zam on these kinds of offensive teams. It gives you an advantage over other offensive teams. It's a terrifying late game cleaner in its own right because Psychic Stab is so good, it's so fast. It enters on Gengar, it's got great bulk. And Tony Flygon in particular has had a lot of success using Espeon. It's a great Pokemon, and it actually makes itself more threatening because, yes, it switches in worse. Like, I really like Alakazam's ability to switch in on a fair chunk of Pokemon because of access to recover. And amazing speed. You know, it's even faster than Raikou and Starmie, whereas it can make things happen against them. Whereas Espeon is slower and has to rely on the 8 PP Morning Sun for recovery. But Espeon also boosts special attack. So this kind of matchup, I think, would have been very interesting. Alakazam versus Espeon is something that's often debated, you know, because they compete for... They have similar roles. They compete for this kind of place. I mean, look at the teams. You have mirror matchups. Down to the fast Psychic type in the last slot is the only thing that changes. Obviously, the movesets are different, okay? I realize that this is a different Zapdos, a pair of Zapdos sets, for example. But by and large, it's the same style of team, and it's really the specifics that make it what it is. And, yeah, that's basically it. And, yeah, you have the same style of team, but this is a more cheesy way of doing it, so... I mean, hey, you do what it takes to win in the big slot. But, again, I think a more standard Zam set would have been just fine there. Yeah, and also it was just a reminder, like, can we ban Swagger yet, I guess? So, Conflict goes to Zapdos here, rather than trying to 1v1 it immediately. The Espeon, this is a good move, because he goes for T-Wave, because, yes, the Espeon might have subbed. Again, sub to block, to take advantage of Thunder Electric's very good. And the reason why that T-Wave isn't a bad move is because if it does sub, then you Whirlwind. And that's a good move because the best case, obviously, is that you T-Wave in on Psychic. But you also prevent a worse case, which is Whirlwinding on Psychic without having done any damage to it. Whereas if you T-Wave and then Whirlwind, the only way Espeon is blocking that T-Wave, besides a Psychic crit, of course, is by subbing, and by subbing it will also lose 19% after lefties, and that will make it easier for Alakazam to break through. So that was very well orchestrated by Conflict. In comes Gengar, and Zapdos is still out of Ice Punch range. Well, actually, it might be a roll at this point because HP Water one of the reasons it doesn't get used as much besides coverage is because it cuts into your IVs or DVs. HP Ice has very minimal impact on your DVs. It only lowers your defense by a bit, but HP Water cuts into your defense and cuts into your HP. It brings Aptos from 383 HP to 367, I believe. So, yeah, but even still, Ice Punch doesn't quite get the job done, and it does get T-Waved. But it doesn't really make a difference because it's all down to Alakazam at this point anyway. Psychic, and, sorry, I skipped ahead by accident. How did I skip back so far? I think my mouse is a little excited. Yeah, so there's the Swagger, and I see even the Espeon is male. So, yeah, Conflict doesn't actually go for Attract here, but he sees, he's trying to Swagger, and it hits itself in confusion with boosted damage, and I think he's just, yeah, not going for Attract there. I don't know why. I guess you just wanted to test the waters and see if it had Morning Sun or not. Although Mono Psychic Espeon is very rare. Generally, it's going to have, you know, HP Water for Tyranitar, and just good super effective coverage against grounds. And sometimes even Bite, but you know, Mono Psychic is very rare. Even BP or Baton Pass is a good option alongside Zapdos if you can pull it off. Like you force the opposing Snorlax to rest, you sub and growth, and it's not ironclad, especially against Rest Talklax, but yeah, so the Zam winds up winning. I mean, Zam is a good check to Espeon just with standard sets. You know, it's a shame we had to see this nonsense. Although, I mean, it does make for good memes, I guess. Anyway, so now it's 2-2, and that means the final game is RBY. And I'll be honest, I love analyzing RBY. I really do, and I have done on this channel before. But at this point, I am very tired, and it has been a long time since I really played RBY very seriously. And so I think I'm very rusty. So I will not attempt to... So I think I'm less familiar with the... I mean, I know the general fundamentals don't really change, but the specific gory details I don't quite know about as much. So we're just going to take this one a little easier. Yeah. But I think that's basically it. I do love RBI. I think it's a phenomenal metagame, and I think a lot of the complaints against it are really just revealing of the ignorance of the people making those complaints, more than any real indictment of the tier itself. But yeah, yeah. At this point, we're over the 2-hour mark. Wow, it's been a while since I made a video that long, and yeah, I don't think my RBY is as sharp as I could to do this game justice. So there's the T-Wave. Lovely Kiss makes it through. So is Zam going to try to burn Turn of Sleep, and Malekith is using Ice Beam. So generally, people say, oh, well, why don't you use Ice Beam if your goal is to freeze things with Jinx? And the answer is, well, you want to do more damage to things like Zam, which otherwise can stay in and try and burn sleep turns to wake up later more easily, whereas with Blizzard, you're really pushing it out. Although, obviously, the greater accuracy gives you more freeze chances, and obviously you have more PP as well. So, there's a Snorlax Body Slam into a reliable Answer Cloister, Blizzard critting, and they're going to be running out of there, going to Chansey. So, how does Malekith respond to Chansey? It reveals that it's T-Bolt and not Seismic Toss, first of all, and he's going to start threatening it with Ice Beam. This is why RBY is the purest form of Pokemon, because at its core, Pokemon is about identifying percentage odds to win the game and going for them. So basically, that Ice Beam could have won the game right there. You know, so you go for it. And now, okay, so another thing about Ice Beam Jinx is that Snorlax switches into it more comfortably. So now that Jinx has been knocked into low health, then Conflict feels safer in going there. And Malekith also, I think what Malekith was trying to do was catch a Snorlax double, because Jinx would have had to rest on that turn if it didn't want to, you know, if it wanted to maximize its odds to actually get the rest off. So Malekith didn't want Snorlax coming in for free, and so he wanted to match the pressure from the Snorlax, or less likely the Tauros. But now he draws a Body Slam and goes to Chansey. And, oh, there's a very early Snorlax crit. There's this ongoing theory that Showdown is bugged, and Snorlax's crit rate, which is really lower Because, like, most Pokemon in RBY have a crit rate higher than the 6.25 of subsequent generations, 2 through 5. But Snorlax is one of the few that actually has a lower crit rate. But it tends to crit so much in RBY that you think it's bugged. And see here, there's another crit rate on that turn. You know, so that's, yeah, 2 and how many body slams? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's crazy. What is it, Tauros? Yeah, so Chansey soft boiling, and now Snorlax generally. Yeah, that's exactly why you kind of want to be wary of body slam spamming with your Snorlax, because that can happen. So, yeah, I mean, that's why when Chansey switches into Snorlax to try and slow it down, it generally tries to do like counter or reflect or something, because otherwise it's just not going to go well. I mean, Body Slam is way more PP than Soft Boiled. So, if any, I mean, yeah, you might take a lot of Snorlax's Body Slams with you, but you also got to be careful of Hyper Beam with Chansey there, which is why Malekith was soft boiling so much, because he was trying to not counter on the turn that Conflict Hyper Beams, because if you Hyper Beam on counter, or if you counter on Hyper Beam, then you go second, and then you actually get finished off before you can get the counter off. Of course, the problem is if Body Slam crits, the whole thing operates on the premise of Snorlax not critting Chansey. You know, because if you get crit by Body Slam, then you soft boiled, but you're still in range of Hyper Beam, so Snorlax can Hyper Beam very safely there. The only thing that would deter a Hyper Beam there would be like the idea that you're going to switch to something else on that Hyper Beam. But hey, the Snorlax is at full health, so there's not much that you really regret Hyper Beaming into at full health here. Like, oh, it Hyper Beamed into a Rhydon or, you know, a Cloyster or something. It's like that's very manageable. So, Hyper Beam Snorlax seems rarer in my experience now, though. I'll let the experts talk about that more, but I have not seen an Hyper Beam Snorlax in... I think they just generally prefer other moves, although maybe I'm talking out of my... Yeah, maybe I'm... I don't know, I just feel like I never see Chansey punished for soft wheeling on Snorlax with Hyper Beam Snorlax, so I'll be more specific in that way. Anyway, so Snorlax is out of the picture now, which is huge for Malekith's Tauros. That's a gigantic advantage. I mean, Cloyster is still there, of course, but it's now Cloyster against Snorlax and Chansey. Sorry, Snorlax and Tauros, as opposed to Cloyster and Snorlax. So, of course, the downside is that Chansey is temporarily out of commission. It's going to have to try and heal on Sleeping Zam or Paralyzed something. And Malekith goes to Jinx and avoids crits and gets the rest off with his own Jinx. So now he's going to be able to go to Snorlax. He burns a rest turn. Nicely done. And avoids a crit. So, of course, the downside of, you know, having your whole Tauros Snorlax thing is that without Chansey, you are now more scared of special attackers. But hey, Conflict does not have a Zapdos last or a Starmie last. He's got a Jinx. Now, we didn't mention the back Jinx earlier, and again, because... you know, it's not really my place of expertise, but the idea of back Jinx, and I generally think I see it more with lead Gengars, but the idea of Jinx, mid-game Jinx, or back Jinx, is that you have such a great sleep move and such a good speed stat, and wouldn't it be great if you could unleash that on a team that was already weakened? You know, because with Jinx trying that whole freeze thing, you know, to win the game the first couple turns, sleep something, freeze something else, then you still are leaving a lot to the unknown. You know, you don't know what your opponent's lead is going to be when you have Jinx in that situation. You don't know what their responses are going to be. And even if you do wind up figuring out their responses quickly, then it's still a very healthy team. And if you can guarantee getting, like, because early game sleep is very common because it's the most powerful status, but if you can get a reliable mid to late game sleep off, that is much more devastating when the opponent has fewer Pokemon with which to take you on. So, and then of course, taking on Jinx's special attacks is no joke either, because it hits quite hard, it's a decent crit rate, all that, a great stab combination. So if you can get a late game sleep off, you have a huge advantage over, you know, Exeggutors, Rhydons, and that can be absolutely devastating. So that is why we have the back Jinx there, but of course it does not present the same level of special threat, overwhelming special threat that a Starmie or Zapdos might be able to in lieu of a healthy Chansey on the opposing team. So in comes Body Slam, another Body Slam on the Cloyster. No paras for the Cloyster. Snorlax cannot get paralyzed in this generation. In comes Starmie, no freeze. I mean, you really clench anytime you see an ice move go off and hit a non-ice Pokemon in this generation, of course, unless Freeze Clause is active. Yeah, so then a nice double switch for Malekith's own Snorlax on Chansey. Now, again, Chansey can take advantage of Snorlax, as we just saw, but with the Thunderbolt on Conflict's end, it's almost surely going to be, oh, well, it's going to get blown up, that's what it's going to be. With Thunderbolt on Chansey, then it's going to be Bolt Beam, T-Wave, almost surely. AK isn't going to, you know, reflect, stall it out, or counter it. So, Snorlax blows it up, and at this point, it's looking very... I mean, it depends, but... Actually, no, that was a perfect blow-up, because now Malekith's Starmie wins the game, basically. It beats Tauros one-on-one, it beats Jinx one-on-one, it beats Cloyster, Alakazam is sleeping, he's got Tauros... So, I mean... Malekith hasn't even lost a Pokemon, and, I mean, yes, Snorlax's Jinx has a sleep turn, and Chansey's on death's door, and it's not that simple. But he hasn't lost a Pokemon, and Conflict has lost both Chansey and Snorlax, so Malekith is incredibly far ahead. So here comes Jinx, and Malekith reveals another Pokemon that looks very much like it's going to win, and that is Alakazam. Now, Alakazam is here to take sleep, because the big thing is that when Malekith's Jinx woke up and rested earlier, it reset Sleep Clause, so Conflict's Jinx can put something else to sleep. So, there's Lovely Kiss, and now Ice Beam, Crit, Freeze. And that is where you got the RBY detractors saying, dude, why is this generation in the tier, or in the tournament, why can't we just get rid of it? And here's why that kind of argument really makes them seem more foolish. Because yes, that was very unfortunate. Of course. You know, I just said Starmie won the game. Oh, well, it switched into an Ice Beam and got frozen. Okay, did it have to switch into Ice Beam and risk the freeze? No, it didn't. I mean, it's a paralyzed Jinx at that. Yeah, it's even more unlucky. But the thing is, Malekith had his own Jinx. And if Conflict goes to Tauros, okay, sure, then you lose your Jinx, or you lose your 9% Chansey, probably that, honestly. You lose your 9% Chansey, and then you go to Starmie, and you know how that Starmie that wins is like the whole thing? Well, then you have the Starmie that wins with a free turn against Tauros. If Tauros stays in and tries to take damage, it tries to damage you or paralyze you or whatever, then it's going to take damage or paralysis, depending on which of an attack or Thunder Wave you choose with your Starmie against it. Either of those make your own Tauros hugely advantaged in the Tauros war. So then Malekith still, and it's not like he's going to be losing Starmie afterwards either. He's going to, at worst, damage or T-Wave the Tauros in that situation, and he's still got Starmie after, and an advantaged Tauros later, and then he can choose how to play around it afterwards. I mean, not to mention the fact that Starmie is probably going to beat the Tauros one-on-one anyway, but you know, and what are the other options for Conflict, really? You know, switch to Jinx on Starmie. You know, when Starmie is usually a switch into Jinx. You know, that's just going to put Jinx on an even faster timer. And then Starmie's going to wear down the Jinx, you know, maybe force rest. And if it doesn't force rest, at one point, Tauros is going to win anyway. You know, Cloyster doesn't switch in. Cloyster switches in, the game's over. Alakazam can switch in. It's at 71%, so call it 70% because of the whole PS rounding thing. And it's going to... Sorry, come on, brain, you got this. It's not likely to wake up. Even if it does wake up, hardly the end of the world. If anything, you know what Starmie getting paralyzed by Alakazam means? Yeah, it means that it can't get frozen by Jinx. So, it's very, you know, the worst case scenarios, if you preserve the Starmie here, are a lot less catastrophic than Starmie getting frozen. So, yeah, in all likelihood, yeah, you lose the Chansey, which is not doing anything anyway, and then you get your Starmie in, and you probably, you know, damage the Tauros, and you're probably winning the game. So, that is the argument against it. Yes, obviously, bad luck in Pokemon happens, but this is a good lesson for Pokemon as a whole, which is you gotta manage the odds, even when they're low, You know, because then stuff like this happens in, you know, huge tournaments at the very end of it. So yeah, now the Starmie is dead. That's it. You know, he goes, and so Conflict has a very free switch to Tauros, because worst case, Malekith goes to Tauros, predicting that. You know, most of the time, odds are, since Conflict can go for a free Ice Beam there, then he's not going to switch Tauros into Ice Beam and remove his only chances at winning. So, with that in mind, he switched to Tauros very freely, and Malekith tried to get his Jinx in on that Jinx Ice Beams to wake it up on the next turn and then, you know, start having an actual useful Pokemon. But Conflict's Tauros switch rendered that moot, and now the Frozen Starmie is sacrificed, and now it's pretty much up to Malekith to win Tauros Wars and still have to deal with the Cloyster afterwards, which is not, you know, impossible, but this is definitely now a lot closer than it should have been. You know, it's not even that the game was guaranteed otherwise, although it was very, very, very much in his favor. It's that he went from having the game extraordinarily in his favor to now pretty much having to get very lucky to win. You know, it's like, yeah, okay, he's not out of it, but he went from being extremely favored to not, and that's basically the summation of competitive Pokemon. So we get even more exciting because both Tauroses immediately crit each other, and Malekith's Tauros actually gets a slightly higher roll, but as far as this matchup is concerned, it's irrelevant because they both dropped a Hyper Beam. So the question is, does Conflict absorb the Hyper Beam? I mean, Malekith doesn't really, or sorry, Conflict doesn't have a downside to Hyper Beaming if he wins the tie, because Alakazam is sleeping, so who cares? Jinx is also sleeping, so who cares? You know, it's not going to wake up, because you don't attack and wake up on the same turn in RBY. That's why Rest is one turn in RBY, but since you don't wake up, since you don't attack on the turn you wake up, it is still effectively 2 turns. So, yeah, even if Jinx does get hit by Hyper Beam, Tauros has to recharge. Okay, it's not going to do damage, so then you finish it off, and then you're in the exact same position. Alakazam, same thing. Chansey dies. Tauros dies. So if Conflict stays in Hyper Beams, then, you know, he pretty much just has to get lucky in the event Malekith stays in. Yeah. Actually, no, it's not as simple as getting lucky, because Malekith, if he Hyper Beams into Cloyster, then the game is over for Conflict. I mean, unless Hyper Beam crits, obviously, because we're at that stage of the game. You know, Hyper Beam into Jinx, okay, then Cloyster gets a free switch, assuming the Hyper Beam doesn't crit, or get the very, very high roll that KOs Jinx from full, but that's very unlikely. So then Cloyster comes in on the recharge turn after, I guess, switching to Jinx is functionally, unless I'm missing something, which is very possible, switching to Jinx is functionally the same as switching to Cloyster, except you don't lose if the Hyper Beam crits, or if you have better odds, I should say, if the Hyper Beam crits, because yeah, you lost your Jinx, but now your Cloyster, now the Tauros has to crit Hyper Beam again in that one-on-one. And Jinx comes in, and then you can double to your own Tauros and get another KO, and then you're in a similar position, and over and over. Although, no, I take it back, because I guess it's not functionally the same, because Cloyster will wind up, if you Hyper Beam on the Cloyster and Tauros recharges and you blow it up and you guarantee you take it out, and then Conflict's Tauros wins. Guaranteed, pretty much. But yeah, so it's not the same thing. I take it back, I'm sorry. Because even if you do take the Hyper Beam with Jinx and then pivot to Cloyster on the recharge, then Malekith's Tauros is not obliged to stay in. So, yeah, so it's not the same thing. Pardon me, good lord, that was almost really bad. So yeah, the move that Malekith would want to make on the Conflict Cloyster switch would be Body Slam, because that Body Slam would put Cloyster in Hyper Beam range. And then it really does become Hyper Beam Wars, because at that point there is no downside to just Hyper Beaming with both players as Tauroses. So, yeah, that's basically it. I guess it's not as simple as that, actually, because Conflict can still sacrifice Cloyster or Alakazam, I guess. And Jinx can still take an Ice Beam, but I don't think it's going to really make that much of a difference functionally. I mean, I guess that, no, because, yeah, Malekith's Jinx is sleeping, so it's not like he really needs to weaken it for Conflict doesn't really need to weaken Malekith's still sleeping Jinx for the purpose of his own Tauros. So yeah, it does really devolve to Tauros Wars after that, unless I'm missing something. But at this point, I'm willing to. At this point, I'm more confident that it's not as drastic a difference as what I just had to correct. Anyway, so yeah, it's down to Body Slam on the... I mean, and even if you do Body Slam as Conflict stays in, then A, you can crit if you win the speed tie. B, you can dodge Hyper Beam. And of course, you can not crit with Body Slam and then dodge Hyper Beam, and then you have to win another speed tie, of course. But then it's then your advantage because, you know, Body Slam has better accuracy than Hyper Beam. But I mean, still, you know, very, you know, the odds are pretty good either way, whether you Hyper Beam. I'm not going to run the numbers exactly, and I can't do them off the top of my head. That's not really my specialty. I'm more of an artsy person. But yeah, basically, if you have to Body Slam or dodge, because if Conflict stays in, there really is no reason for him not to Hyper Beam. Whereas if Malekith's choice is between Body Slam and Hyper Beam, Conflict's is between Hyper Beam and switch to Cloyster. Yeah, so you want to, I mean, you can still crit the Cloyster with Hyper Beam, worst case, and that's part of the Tauros dynamic. But yeah, there's yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So, can you imagine if I just ended the video here? That'd be sadistic. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else I'm overlooking. I don't think so. Or any little part of the dynamic. Also, hashtag building up suspense or something. Modern Hitchcock. Modern Clouseau, I should say. I love that guy. I discovered him this year. I've heard Chabrol is also in that Clouseau Hitchcock vein. Anyway, had to get that in there, I guess. Anyway, so yeah, I don't think there's anything else to it. I think you just... Yeah, okay. Cloyster does come in, and Malekith Body Slams! He doesn't get the para, but now there is no downside to the Hyper Beam, so he sacks the Alakazam. Wow. So he made the Body Slam call. So I want to say... Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Is that better odds? Like, you stay in, you win the speed tie, you Body Slam crit, or you dodge the Hyper Beam? I guess if you're taking Hyper Beam accuracy into account. Is that better odds than Hyper Beam critting the Cloyster? I want to say... Because Hyper Beam critting Cloyster is... What, Taurus's crit rate is 21, and then you know, factor in the 10% mischance. Yeah, so it's a little less than 21%. I think Taurus's crit rate is 21. Surely it is. Isn't it like 21? Yeah, Starmie is 22, Zam is 23. If I'm remembering right, anyway. I know it's 21 point something, actually, but simplifying. Can we get the music playing again, please? Yeah, so you have to... The odds of that, you know, let's just call it 20%-ish of critting Cloyster with Hyper Beam versus 50... Well, I guess you don't have to win the speed tie. You can also dodge the Hyper Beam. Versus the same... It is going to be 21% to crit the Tauros with Body Slam. And then you also have the 50% of winning the speed tie or the 10% of dodging Hyper Beam. So those do... So again, I'm no mathematician. But those are pretty good odds. So, you know, rather than the prediction, I guess you could simplify it by saying, look, you know, worst case, these are the better odds. And you could say, now, it's not as simple as that, because you could say if you just, you know, play the odds every time, then you get predicted. You know, if you know that Malekith is going to go for Body Slam because it's better odds, then you stay in and go for Hyper Beam, because that becomes your best choice in that scenario, if you know. So it's the combination of the stats and the guessing game. The mind game, you know, analyzing how the other player is playing and all that stuff. Yeah, but of course, it's far from an exact science, you know. But the stats are the things you can be sure of. Anyway, Zam gets sacked to the Hyper Beam, and now it is down to Tauros. And Conflict wins the tie, and that's going to be, barring a miraculous early wake-up from Malekith, which you don't have to... he wakes up, and Hyper Beam doesn't miss, and it crits to rub the salt in the wound. and we're not going to see any 1 out of 256 misses. And yeah, that's the series. That's the tournament. Conflict is the winner of the Smogon Classic. So, I mean, that is a shame, because right down to the end, Malekith did make that better, to make the Tauros read and everything. But it goes to show that whole the freeze thing. I mean, yeah, but it could have been avoided. You know, imagine the same dynamic, but you have thrown out your worthless Chansey, and instead you have a Starmie, which takes on pretty much everything. After it was set up so beautifully with the Snorlax boom on the Chansey too. So, yeah, it's a shame that that's how it went. But yeah, it just really is a lesson in being. I mean, I don't mean to use Malekith's, downfall as a lesson, because I would explode. I mean, I would be upset with myself too, but this stupid game, But yeah, for those watching, you can never, in situations like that, when you could afford to be. Obviously, it would be much different if Malekith had no choice but to switch Starmie into that Ice Beam. Then it's a completely different dynamic, of course, obviously. But he did have that choice. He was far ahead enough he was like, look, take this stupid Jinx. I don't need it. I need my Starmie above all costs. I am not risking it. I can afford to. That's pretty much everything. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know this was a long one. And again, please check out the movie, or the trailer. I hope you enjoy it. And please consider donating to the Indiegogo and spread the word. But yeah, congratulations to both players on an incredible achievement. Just making it this far, and then putting on a really astonishing show in the finals. Yeah, Malekith played this very well, so it's hardly a mark of shame or anything like that. So, I mean, even the Starmie move, it's not like it was a bad move. It was just the move that opened it up to a very unlucky turn. Getting frozen by a paralyzed Pokemon. But I mean, just talk about Ice Beam, if that's Blizzard, that move might not even connect. So, yeah, thank you, and I will see you in the next one.